Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're doing another book review with the fabulous Monty.
Hello, it's me, it's Monty. How's everyone doing?
Author, artist, the extraordinaire.
I I don't know how to introduce myself very well. I'm just Monty. Everyone knows me as Monty, or the very few out there call me Montana, but I'm Monty. I am hoping to be an author one day. I'm not an author yet. I'm a writer still. I'm still in the writing process, but one day Numenor Star will be out there, and so will all sorts of other wonderful things as
The
well.
Easties and the Westies.
The Westies, the Easties.
So today's book is
Yes.
a Western that called itself, it was introduced to us through an article talking about reframing the Western genre. And since that is one of Monty's bread and butter, it's one of her favorite genres. And we're talking about contemporary writing of Westerns. We were like, why not take a look at what they're trying to do to Westerns? Spoiler alert, it's not good.
No,
They're
no.
not trying to make Westerns for the better. They're trying to corrupt it with the same thing that is corrupt every other genre that they've been like, we need to make this for modern audiences. So we're going to get a little bit into the article that brought us this story. And then we're going to get into the story itself and talk about all of the problems with it. Also, this is going to come into the conversation later, but it's probably best if you don't write a genre if you're not interested or liking the genre.
Yeah, I got the sense that the person writing this book did not like the genre because it's odd because it has the language of a Western, but it's mostly kind of just coasting on the genre. It's
Mhm.
not really
It's not
fully.
engaging.
No, not in the slightest bit. I barely remember this book, and I finished it 2 days ago. But thank God for notes, and it'll come back to me. I guess my brain's trying to purge, but nothing significant truly happens because it's so boring. It's boring, and it skips over things that probably shouldn't have been skipped over. Like, not just probably, but shouldn't have been skipped over at
Mhm.
all because there's no context for a lot of the things that happen later on in this book. And the character of Bridget, as this Western coasts on the episode, like the edge of being a Western, the character of Bridget kind of coasts through the whole book. Like the whole book, it's just she's coasting through just on an easy ride, just like a freeloader almost.
So we'll get into what all of that looks like. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel and you like Monty being here, please hit the like, share, subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through LMY, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt. You write a short story or a fragment that includes the prompt. And then the first Monday video of the month is basking in the creativity of this community because everybody that submits is always so insanely talented and creative and surprising. And then the second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book coming out, submit your first chapter and your cover, and they'll be right here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work because that is the hardest part once the book is
Yes.
made.
Yes.
And then if you would like to check out any of my books and in the future Monty's books, you can find those links down in the description below. And you can request them at your local library if you don't want to pay for them. And it'll also share the love. So
Share the love, man. There's not enough
share
around.
the love.
The
So
love.
the first things first, the New York Times introduced this book to me through Reframing the West, a new fiction makes room for voices long denied. A wave of novels is drawing from well springs of race, class, and gender to expand the genre. I don't think that that's what the Western genre is for.
Not
The
really, but
Western, like
also like
it's
this
not
is
for grievance. What I'm saying is it's not for grievances. You can include obviously there's going to be class differences if you're talking about Westerns because you've got, even when we're just playing Red Dead Redemption, you've got like the poor, the townships, and then the obvious rich people.
yes.
So there is an obvious class struggle that is part of just the Western genre because it's also in the Western period was a period of development.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, that's still, kind of in a lot of ways the same for today. It's just there's different environments for different like echelons of wealth. You got your middle class, you got your lower middle class, you got the lower class, and then you have the upper middle class to the wealthy 1% type people. And they live in vastly different worlds than people below them. It's just kind of the structure that's always been in place. But in the old days, like, yes, there absolutely, not even just in the Old West, but over in Europe too. There were, and not even Europe or Asia as well. There's class differences. There's always been class differences.
Yep.
Always, no matter what you looked like. Maybe you were worse off if you looked a certain way, but even then, you know, I don't really understand why they wanted to go on the Western, other than the Western is basically kind of, unfortunately, becoming a niche genre, and it's sort of dying in a way. Like,
well, we're gonna reinvigorate it, but maybe a little bit, maybe at least get people excited with some beautiful characters.
Yes, I would hope so.
But Westerns in general, like, they're either, as far as I'm aware, they're either going to be, well, they're generally going to be adventures. Mm-hmm. They're going to have the gunslinging involved of some kind. And like, and this mentions race, class, and gender. We already mentioned class, which class shows up in our book too.
Oh yeah.
And the differences between all of the main cast, they all come from different backgrounds.
Yes.
And you're going to see the difference in race because that just comes into the social issues of the time.
Yes.
And so does gender, because they're, depending on what time period you're in, you've got even the suffragettes, but you've got women playing a different role in society with different expectations than men, which also comes into our story, surprisingly. Like, yeah, with Marcella versus Daisy versus Billy. Mm-hmm. Who all fit into society differently, and their expectations, because they're women, are also different than their male counterparts.
Yes, they are. And even then, like, that's just a part of history that you cannot ignore. Like, you can't ignore it, even if you don't want to like emphasize it. It's still something that happened. It's still something that was, you know, it was difficult for people of, you know, certain races and certain gender stuff like that. But it's just a reality that people, for some reason, want to, I don't know if necessarily the word is like erase, but kind of appropriate in a weird way. Like it, like the whole idea of like a female gunslinger is not a new concept. It's been done in Westerns before. Mm-hmm. There have been leading female characters in Westerns before. And while, you know, arguably not a lot of leading female characters, because the genre is predominantly written by men, and we all almost tend to write in our own genders for our main characters. Like, I always have, at least. There's some people that aren't like that. It's true, but you know, it's it's mostly a genre that is, yeah, definitely dominated by men, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing either, because not a lot of women are interested in that.
Yeah, I just think that this is a bizarre thing. That's only somebody who doesn't read that genre or know anything about that genre would say. Yeah. And I'm not even a Western aficionado, but even you look at like Blazing Saddles, which is a satire of or a comedy, a Western comedy, and that deals with race and class.
Yes, it does. I've not seen Blazing Saddle in years, but I remember it briefly. But yeah, like, you got the Blood Meridian, Lonesome Dove, you know, True Grit's another one. You got anything written by, like, I think Louis L'Amour, like, very prominent. Zane Grey was super prominent in the Western genre. Like, a lot of these people who wrote for that genre, because at the time, there wasn't probably much else to write about. And because I believe Louis L'Amour is actually someone who existed in that period. I don't know if it's Louis L'Amour or Zane Grey, but either way, one of the two of them lived in that time period or grew up in that time period to see it change over time. And so they're writing from their experiences. And one thing people kind of fail to understand is that Westerns are kind of like super inherently American. Mm-hmm. Super inherently American. And I've always admired them. I've always liked going on an adventure because I feel like there's this spirit of freedom in them. Mm-hmm. I think people who kind of go in there to try and like remove that spirit of freedom just to sit there and prove a point about how dark and terrible it was during that time period. It's true, it was very gruesome. But to kind of try and ruin that spirit with cynicism rather than like the abject spirit of freedom or the Americanness of it just kind of bothers me, because that's what makes the Western genre Western. It's what people like about it. And I've always enjoyed the Western, and Westerns have been revitalized a lot. The Dark Tower is an example I can think of. That people refer to that as a fantasy, but no, my friends, that is a Western. Like, that is a full stop Western. You've read through those books. Yes, there are fantastical elements, super fantastical elements in it, but it is a Western at its core. And I have seen it time again. True Grit did the same thing too. True Grit, if y'all read that book or seen that movie, then you understand what I'm talking about. So this is not something that hasn't been done before. It's just nobody's really focusing on Westerns these days anymore, unfortunately, unless it's Red Dead Redemption. But you mentioned movies like, The Searchers, or I think Red River is one of them. Any of these old school Westerns like out there, a lot of people are like, I don't even know what that is. I'm like, how? They're great. But, oh well, I'm just going on. Excuse me.
Now it's going to be interesting to go through the way that this article frames Lucky Red, since we've read it now. So we can see how what they say about it and what, compares to what our experience was. This article is by Celia McGee. It starts, their eyes meet across the crowded street in 1870 Dodge City, Kansas. The gunslinger bounty hunter and the impulsive rebel, one a dark-haired loner, the other a striking redhead, two young women destined to work out their mutual sparks on the frontier where Owen Wister enshrined the all-male, all-white Western genre novel with The Virginian in 1902.
I find that so incredibly dishonest. This has two main characters.
She doesn't even come in until 50%.
She doesn't 50% later in the book, and even then she's hardly in the book. Not only that, like, all white. I'm like, I didn't hear her mention any black characters in this book. Did you?
I don't remember any super description except for like Lila.
Yeah, Lila or
Kate. Lila, Spartan, and then Bridget, Sally. And then Sally, and a little bit of Jim.
But not much, because
maybe a little bit of Roscoe, but Roscoe was only described enough to insult him.
Yeah, basically. And so this is a lie. Like, this whole book is a lie. Like, I feel like people are just, this is a
mischaracterization. But a character like that, you would think, I would imagine with a characterization like that the book would at least start out like Guns and Smoke, where Bonnie was in the middle of Las Vegas and she met eyes with Jesse and then stole his wallet in the middle of chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would assume.
Like, super attracted to him the second she saw him, like, super sparks fly. No, not really. Like, the only time you really these sparks flying, and that's, I'm using that term loosely, by the way. The sparks flying only come from the perspective of Bridget, but not Spartan. Like,
there aren't even sparks. I did not feel any chemistry at all. Going on. In Claudia Craven's debut novel, Lucky Red, the two main characters are Bridget Shaughnessy, earning her keep as a sporting woman at the Buffalo Queen Saloon, and Spartan Lee, a notorious sharpshooter who has touched down in Bridget's life, bearing the warning line, whenever I tire of a place, I just light out.
Well, I swear, like, this whole article, like, the sentiment, it's history reverberating from Mark Twain to Zane Grey to Charles Portis and Cormac McCarthy, animates Craven's interrogation of traditional stereotypes and storylines in Western fiction. The audacity to compare her to any of these legends, it just pisses me off so much. Cormac McCarthy, she doesn't hold a candle to that man's work. She doesn't hold a candle to Charles Portis or Zane Grey or Mark Twain. How dare you?
Also, like this, finishing this paragraph. So does the abiding trope of a mysterious stranger riding into town to upend the law, order, minds, and hearts. Spartan Lee doesn't do that.
No, she doesn't. Not
She
one
brings
second.
in a freaking outlaw to be hanged and then just hangs out and plays cards until she gets bored and leaves.
Yeah, I'm sitting here and as I'm reading this article because like I brushed over it and I hadn't read the book yet and I was like irritated with it. But now after reading the book and knowing what it is, this is a lie. This is a bold-faced lie, and I'm sick of people trying to bolster up women in this way by putting them on the same pedestal as men who are better writers. Not saying that men are better writers, but the men who wrote their work before this book came out are better writers inherently. She does not hold a candle to them at all. This is just trying to make her look as good as them, and that's a lie. And I think that is disgusting to do that. Just to like, it's an insult to women, I think.
So she goes on to say, I love that archetype, the archetype of the mysterious stranger riding into town to upend the law. But I thought, what if the stranger Bridget falls in love with is a woman instead of a man? I mean, what if the mysterious stranger that she falls in love with is actually that archetype? Because that did not happen.
Right? No.
Craven, a seventh-generation Californian who identifies as a queer bisexual, said the playing with genre and the mystic space gave her imagination a home on the range. She is not alone. A wave of new fiction attuned to both revised approaches to American history and personal responses to the meaning of the West is reframing the idea and image of the region to include realities and subject matters long ignored or denied. Stories drawn from various wellsprings of race, class, gender, epoch, and perception have expanded the genre, rearranging the standard narrative to create a more complex sense of time and place. I would say that paragraph alone tells me that the people involved in whatever this article is do not like the genre, because they're saying they, one, have not examined it, as if it's not a complex genre that takes those things into consideration already. It just depends on the author, but you're getting different perceptions. You're, like we said before, you're getting race and class and gender involved in the story as part of these social things of the time.
Yeah, even then in the book, a lot of that stuff, like they talk about race, the race was never really brought up.
Chinese author approached a literary agent about a novel featuring a Chinese family swept in by the gold rush and was told that she said that this book is too much about immigration and race and environmental concerns. The West has also exerted a gravitational pull on more established authors recently. This spring, Susanna Moore, Victor Lavelle, and Charles Frazier have turned their gaze westward. So, like, there are many more novels in here.
Maybe they're not having their luck in whatever respected genre they try to break into, and so now they're going to try to break into a sleeping one. Let's not say dying. I'll say a sleeping one.
I think it is sleeping.
Yeah, sleeping Western. Because Red Dead revitalized that whenever that came out. But I feel like what Red Dead, I have my own issues with it as much as I love it. I have to tell you about them soon when you finish the game. But it is a sleeping genre. It is not popular by any stretch of the word. It is sort of become a niche. But back way when, you know, it was super popular. Like very, very popular. And for them to come into the genre, I'm just like, okay, do you have a love of Westerns? Do you think that you could tell a story? Because there are lots of stories you can tell about, you know, from anyone's perspective in a Western. There's a lot of things you can do with that. I just don't like it when you try to market it as like this, you know, bastion of equality or like, what would be the word? Representation or something like that in terms of like, oh, this is why this is going to be good versus, or it's good for these reasons, but nothing else. They don't ever really discuss anything else except for like how socially relevant it is, despite the fact it takes place in the 1800s. Like,
yep. Which just makes me think of Out of Darkness, which was in like 1936, but it was acting like it was the 1800s.
I know that.
And I get that there was still discrimination in the 1930s, but like it was acting way
it was
too
totally
much for
the exaggerated
misery porn. Yeah. Craven's awareness of Western nature's vulnerability was matched by her desire for authenticity in the novel, which I don't see an understanding of authenticity when you're
No,
changing stuff. But look, from the foods that Bridget fancies to the plots of violence. What? To the clothes the character wears. Craven's mother, a former costume designer, was my constant correspondent. So are you telling me that the most authentic thing was her mother's costume designer?
I honestly, with the character of Bridget in the article saying that, this article is lying through its teeth. Because Bridget has no interest in anything, like anything. She doesn't even get new clothes until a few months later.
Which is even more bizarre looking at this is why is she not spending all of her money getting relevant clothing?
Mm-hmm.
Lucky Red, so down here at the bottom of the article, Lucky Red's Dodge City lies in the southern end of the cattle trails that might have dusted the plains in Lavelle's Lone Woman, because Bridget's small particular world would have been quite segregated, Craven said. All of her characters are white. Riding out toward Western Horizon is Bridget's only way to turn away from every place that I've ever been. And Craven is reading a lot about forests and monsters and mysteries. She said, I'm looking forward to seeing where that takes me. That just tells me that I feel like Lucky Red is even more of a prologue.
Oh my God.
Just the entire book is a prologue. So it's a waste of time.
Oh, so a waste of time.
Do you see what I'm saying with it being a prologue?
Yeah, that actually makes sense now for why it is the way it is, because it seems so. I cannot get over how it felt rushed, but then also felt like time just stood still for so long. Like I don't know if it was because she was like focusing. There was more emphasis put into the food and the design than it was actually really ingratiating itself in the Old West.
Yeah. Which we're going to get into now as we actually
Yeah.
start the review to go through the story. So we will opine as we go. Let's get into
this
it.
show
Let's
on
get
the road,
into
bro.
So the novel opens with a woman. We'll learn her name is Bridget, obviously, and she's talking about how she's a whore, but she's not the kind of girl who likes to be still. She's mostly leading into an epic tale about how things are. So this book kind of sets it up to be, she's telling you what happened to her.
Yes, past tense. So,
again, it's probably a prologue for whatever this author decides to do next.
Whole book prologue.
Yeah. Quote, all of which is to say, though I ended up a pretty girl in boy's clothes, mounted like a woman and armed like a man, I started much smaller and simpler and mostly alone. There's exposition about her dad being a drunkard with bad luck. Her mom died. There was the brothers that she had were off to war, and her dad was on the losing side. Her dad also had no conviction in anything that he did. He bought horses, but had no will to break them in. So that didn't go anywhere as a business.
Yeah, I thought that was, like, of course, that the man is incompetent. It's like all lesbian fiction. All lesbian, but the men are always incompetent.
He got sheep that he didn't care to take care of. She was left alone on her own and had to pick up the slack to take care of him and herself. This novel starts out where she is 16 and she was getting too ripe to be left unguarded. That's how she described herself. With a phrase like that, I was expecting her to actually run into trouble when she was on the prairie by herself, or, to actually care when she was in town. But she acts like, oh yeah, there's no problem at all, and she never gets into any trouble.
She runs into no trouble whatsoever, not one bit of trouble whatsoever from any outside source. The whole depiction is the same martyr-esque type thing we get and see in a lot of fiction nowadays, especially if the protagonist is female. A lot of times the writers like to make them these martyrs, and I find it to be completely ridiculous. And she's no different than that. She does all the chores, she does all the cooking, she might as well do all the hunting, and her father is a buffoon.
It's the Feyre. I was reading this intro and I was like, it's Feyre.
It's Feyre from ACOTAR. It's Bonnie from Guns and Smoke. The martyrdom. Please stop. It's not heroic. It's very unacceptable.
It continues from her being like, I have to take care of myself and dad with, oh yeah, he would go out and do his business venture or have his bad luck. And then he would come home and he would cry and need comforting because he was a failure. And then she didn't do a good enough job at making him feel better. And then he would cry even more and need even more comforting.
No, she said she had to pretend like she was actually caring. Like,
Yeah.
oh, instead of just bitter and mad that he didn't give me a chance to go to school, I'm like, where are you living? In a shack out in the woods? Because that's what I envisioned, since she's in Arkansas and I guess near the Ozarks, I suppose. But so I'm imagining this little rickety ass shack out in the woods and her in like just rags, barefooted rags. She's a hillbilly, so to speak. That's what I imagine her starting out as. And her dad is like gross and sweaty and incompetent and makes all these barters and deals with people and nothing ever comes through. And it's really interesting that you say that, because I watched this documentary about Little House on the Prairie, about the real Laura Ingalls Wilder, who essentially, her father was kind of like that, except her father was a bit more proactive than this guy and did find some success to a degree. But in the Little House on the Prairie books, Laura Ingalls Wilder, to kind of cope with how her father was behaving, she idealized him into what we see in like the television show and in the books, the one where he's like this decorated in honor and heroism, when really he was a very flawed man. So I kind of wonder if she took inspiration from that, where the father is good, essentially. He's not a bad man. He's just he's a weak one, but friendly enough.
Which would be fine. And you can make like your female character have to take care of dad because dad kind of sucks at what he's doing. But it starts to not really work very well when your main character is, one, emotionally distant, and two, resentful, and three, like dad is bad at everything and daughter makes up for everything.
Exactly. And
like, if she resents dad, then why is she still there? Just leave.
That's what I would say too. But then again, that kind of goes into Bridget's behavior, where she doesn't necessarily really hunger for anything outside of her present situation or circumstances. Like, not one time. Maybe briefly there's these, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to be this, and she would kind of get, peak up in interest whenever someone mentioned the big prairie and these adventures. But it's never enough to really give the idea that she wants more for herself, like, it all throughout this entire book at all.
So we get, quote, once he started crying, I'd have to smile and lie right into his face for hours on end until he calmed enough to pull himself up into the loft, where he'd snore like a full crew of lumberjacks or toss and shout when his dreams grew too lifelike. Sometimes, as I lay awake after a long evening spent dabbing at his cheeks, I wished that he would have just smacked me instead. It was an ungrateful sentiment, but a beating would have been less humiliating than pretending that I didn't mind that I'd never been to school, that all I wore were baggy hand-me-downs, and the pretty girls in town wouldn't even talk to me.
Yeah, so she's blaming all this on her dad. All of this on her dad. And really,
and she's going, I'm not victimized enough. I wish he would just beat me instead of crying.
know, right?
Oh my gosh. I don't want to give him emotional labor.
No more emotional labor. Just whoop my ass, Dad. I'll take a beating. Like, I remember reading that and thinking, wow.
I was like, I don't like this girl already. No.
Yeah, no, after that, I was like, bitch, don't even try me. Don't even try me. Like, you've already got a toot, and I'm not with it, okay? Like, the man's doing the best he can, but what are you exactly doing to try and help him?
Hanging out.
I don't really see her actually try and, like, persuade him out of doing things.
She is pretending to care.
She's pretending to care and not doing anything. She's, like I said, she coasts the whole way through the book. She's a freeloader.
Yep. So she's cooking food. I mean, she does that. She's cooking food that she caught when her dad comes home, calling for her. He comes home with a couple of mules, and Bridget asks where he got them. He said he was talking to this guy over a business deal, and the guy said that he wanted a woman, but dad didn't want to offer his daughter, so he offered their house instead. And so then dad apparently traded their house for 2 mules and 20 acres in another state, and he was sure that in that other state their luck was going to change.
This is me just assuming that the 20 acres of land are real, and then the guy who offered to give him his mule and wagon and the 20 acres of land to live in that shack and on their property, because I envisioned it being a very like run down, not a great place to live, her and her dad. And he traded what he could have had out wherever they were going to go for a shack in the middle of the woods. And I'm like, why would you do that? But then I was like, oh, well, maybe it's not even real and he just got hoodwinked. And it's probably that he got hoodwinked big time.
I mean, I would not. We don't even find that out because Bridget doesn't have enough drive to even go to look at the property.
Yeah, no, she doesn't. She
doesn't even try. She just kind of goes to the first town she runs into and then is like, well, this is where I am. Yeah. She doesn't even try to sell the property.
No, she doesn't, but she sells the mule.
So they're traveling to their new place that they're going to live at. They stop for the night and they buy this little cabin, this random little cabin somewhere. And instead of like making their beds in the cabin, which is empty, they like just set up camp outside of the cabin.
Yes.
And this is like they're talking about how it looks like an abandoned cabin.
Yeah, and I thought for sure, because I kind of forgot, because in the article it actually mentioned that the dad got bit by a snake and died because of it. And I had forgotten that. I had forgotten that aspect. I thought, a cabin. What could go wrong?
I was expecting them to go in the cabin and then kind of get shot, which would have made a lot more sense if they'd gone into the cabin, especially with what we find out who owns the cabin later. It would have made a lot more sense if they just gone in the cabin, because obviously, like they set up, and this book does this a couple of times too, where it's like, hey, I'm going to do this scenario or the situation, and it's not going to make any difference at all. So they set up their stuff outside. And for a couple of paragraphs, they're just outside. And then a storm rolls in. So then they go inside the cabin. So they end up inside of the cabin anyway. So what was the point of making them do their bedrolls on the ground?
I don't know. And not only that, but like if a storm's rolling through and they're about to leave the cabin, they went into the cabin, but they left their bedrolls and shit outside.
Why the frick did they leave their bedrolls outside?
Because they got spooked by the storm. And so now their bedrolls are all messed up and wet. And they're going to mildew later on. Like, I don't imagine anything that they've taken with them is clean, because they don't sound like clean people, just from the way that Bridget described her lifestyle before leaving Arkansas.
I thought that, she'd been scared, so she went inside, and then it said like she put herself to work to remain calm and busy. So I thought they'd moved their stuff inside, but maybe she was just...
I don't remember if they moved it inside or not. Maybe they did, but it's really insignificant because I don't recall.
So then they lay down and sleep eventually, and she wakes up to her father screaming. It turns out he was bit by a rattlesnake.
Which is really funny that he got bit by a rattlesnake, because like if it makes sense for it to try to move into the house during the rain to seek shelter, but also if you're not doing anything to it, it wouldn't attack you. Like they're not aggressive unless you're like pissing them off intentionally. And he gets bit in the throat. Like there's no hope for you, especially now. Like,
I just wanted to do that. The other funny thing about this, so we already know that Bridget doesn't care about her dad, but in watching her watch her dad and reading about her, watch her dad die, there's no emotion. He gets bit in the neck. She stares at him while he's screaming.
She doesn't even do anything.
And then he dies later once they leave. Okay, so quote, somewhere late in the afternoon, there came an exhale that was not followed by an inhalation. In the silence that followed, I sat halfway up, leaning forward, as though it was only a moment's suspense that I had to weather, and not the soundless crossing over into a new orphaned life. I stood up, dizzy, and stumbled on tingling, half-asleep feet back to the spring, wading in up to my knees before I sank down, submerged to the waist and gazing out across the empty plains. I looked at the dappled shadows of the water's surface and found suddenly that I had my fill of shade.
Yeah, no real thought about her father dying horrifically, mind you. She didn't even seem to care about her father dying. It's like he didn't die soon enough, really. It's just how it actually went. He didn't die soon enough.
Yep, we got with more of that. There's each rising and falling of my chest lay heavy on me as I realized that I was truly alone now, that the periods in which I'd been abandoned previously both had and had not prepared me for this. I imagined my pa's waving his hat and wishing me good luck as he placed a hand of fate and felt a crack in the crust of resentment that had grown over my heart. I did not wish myself good luck. I did not hope that Providence would treat me kindly. Instead, I told myself that it was up to me to keep my chest rising and falling, and that to do so, I could not be governed by the world's twists and turns, always whipped about by sad winds as he had been. I had never held out much hope for the places my life's road would take me, for I was the daughter of a poor and feckless man, and in witnessing his thrashing about, I had learned to adjust my expectations again and again. But I also found as I sat under the black wing of the night sky that I still had some fight left in me, and I made a promise to the indifferent stars above that I would live better than the wet-eyed corpse ever could.
Oh my gosh.
What a way to talk about your dead
I
dad.
know. It's like, wow, way to dishonor your father. Like, she really didn't like him at all. And it's not like he's
No.
unlikable. We don't spend enough time with him to really make up our opinion about him, like at all. Like, he seems friendly enough, obviously, fickle, and probably does what she says he does, because that's the only frame of reference we have to really go off of, is that it's what she feels about him, and it's told through her perspective. But I started to notice the problem here, where the language of the Western that it's using is really not ingratiating itself. It's more concerned with trying to sound pretty and profound than it is trying to give us an actual story. And that is pretty much the entire case for the rest of this book. Is like, it's trying to sound profound and meaningful, and really, if she doesn't have any kind of desire to be anywhere or do anything, like, I don't get a sense of her having any kind of fight in her. She just, again, seems like she's coasting. We don't see her doing anything after her father dies, except for just kind of being a lump staring up at the sky.
She buries him in a shallow grave.
Yep, she buried him in a shallow grave.
Here we go, quote. I buried my pa under the cottonwood trees. It took most of the day to dig. Though I was strong from plenty of hired work, the prairie soil was hard-packed and laced over top with such a thick net of sod that it took all that I had to scrabble a shallow grave out of it. Before I pushed him in, I rifled pa's pockets. I found his wallet, which had $13, about 12 more than I expected, and his pocket knife, which still held an edge. I didn't find the folded pieces of greasy paper that was supposed to have secured our future. But 20 acres of grass wouldn't have done me a lick of good anyhow, even if the plot had been real, which I doubted it was. There you go. So he said that he got acreage, didn't have any paperwork for it. She didn't find any paperwork for it. But also,
and wouldn't you think that you try to say, hey, look, maybe you shouldn't have done that, and shouldn't have been like, see, she doesn't even try to do her own kind of investigation on the matter either. Like, oh, this man said this. He traded 20 acres of land, his wagon, his mules for this shack. And
yes, shouldn't they have waited to see that guy come in? Two, when her dad was like, hey, yeah, I got these 2 mules and 20 acres of land, would she not be like, okay, Dad, show me the deed?
Yeah, really. She didn't ask him anything. We barely see her speaking to her father.
Yep.
Like, hardly at all. She's just kind of going with the flow, really just going with the flow. She doesn't care about anything. This whole idea, I had fight left in me. I don't feel like you had any fight in you at all to begin with, Bridget.
And then we got her right here going, I was plenty strong. I was strong from plenty of hired work. Where is all of that strength and all that skill when she gets to Dodge City and she's like, oh no, I can't get a job?
Right? Like, instead, like, oh my goodness. And then also, like, it just rained. I would think the ground, especially since it's near a spring too, I feel like the ground might be a little damp, like, from the rain. So I don't know where she would like, oh, it's just too hard to dig into. Well, it just rained, so it's muddy. Like, maybe further down, yeah, but you could at least have given your dad like a decent burial. Like, I mean, just to endear us a little bit to you. But
no,
you didn't do that.
None of that.
None of that. Like,
we get quote, I dragged and rolled the body into the hole. I'd scraped out and piled the dirt over it, having neither the time nor the patience to search for rocks. When I was done, mud-streaked and exhausted, I laid one hand upon the mound. I tried to think of something to say, and no words came out of me. So I just patted it a couple of times and stood up.
Goodbye, Dad. Rest in peace, Dad. Like, I know that, we didn't always see eye to eye, but I'm sorry you're gone and I'm sorry you went like that because, like,
No, screw that guy.
there's no moment of, like, realization that, like, her father is gone and she's never going to get him back because, like, if she stuck around, that implies some form of, like, attachment, I would think, but it is Bridget, so I'm probably just, like, projecting myself in here.
Bridget doesn't have any emotions.
She has, like, no emotions whatsoever, unless it's, like, suitable for the situation for her to be emotional. But other than that, like, it goes back to her being, like, deadpan and, like, nothing. I thought that was, like, so ridiculous. I was like, are you serious? You have nothing to say to your dad? Like, at all? Like, he took care of you. I mean, of course, she could probably argue, oh, she took care of herself. I'm like, well, no, not really, because she's stupid.
She still, like, took the money that her dad brought home from doing what her dad did.
And her dad had $13 on him, so that's pretty, pretty nifty right there. But even then, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this, and I remember reading it and thinking, like, even if you did resent somebody, you still kind of love them at the same time too. And for them to be gone, you start to think about, like, all the things you didn't say to them or all the fights you had. And there's, like, a real feeling of regret in not being able to be honest with somebody and not saying the things that you probably should have said to somebody or making amends. It does tend to haunt you, especially if you have a conscience. But, well, this is Bridget. Who doesn't really have a conscience. Like,
so we enter the travel log for a bit, where it's just a bit of summary of her traveling and hiding from any sign of people until she reaches Dodge City. I was hoping at this point that there would be I need to get out of Dodge moment, but there was no.
There wasn't.
I was so disappointed.
How do you not take advantage of that is my question. I'll take advantage of that. Like, come on.
So she gets there, sells one of the mules, and finds a place to stay in. It's just an inn. And she's like, well, they obviously don't trust me because of how much they had me pay up front to stay here. And I also look pretty dirty. Once she's in the room, quote, I shut the door to my little room, and at the side of a real bed, neither a roll or a threadbare blanket, nor a loud, itchy corn husk pallet, I stood in the middle of the floor and wept. Then I laid down and slept clear through the next morning, when I was awoken by the thunk of the key fob falling from my bald fist. So, like, I don't even know if she's just crying because she's like, oh my gosh, a bed.
Oh my
or
God,
if, like, her dad's death is finally hitting her, which I don't think it's her dad's death because I really don't think she cares. I think she's just like, oh my gosh, luxury.
And not only that, but, like, before she got to that little ramshackle inn, like, she did go around town, but nobody wanted to put her up with them. Just like, you're a place where people drive their cattle through. I'm sure you've seen plenty of dirty people, so it's just kind of, I feel sorry for her. Like, I mean, come on. And she had money to begin with. And then not only that, but you might be asking yourself, because guess what? 2 weeks goes by. What did Bridget do, you may ask?
I ran through every dime that I had without ever once leaving the hotel. On waking up each morning, I'd slither into my dress, a hand-me-down that had started out too big in Arkansas and became a faded pink sack during my travels, and pattered down to the dining room. The hotel was little more than a flop house, but there was a real cook of sorts, and I think that he took pity on me. My days began with great steaming mugs of coffee with enough cream to make my spoon stand upright, 4 or 5 fried eggs layered over thick slabs of toast spread with sun-colored butter, fat glossy sausages with chunks of peppercorn tucked here and there. I ate as though I were packing my soul back into my body, as though I would never be served again. I thrilled at every meat that wasn't possum or squirrel or the meanest hen in a worn-out flock. I'd never mastered the baking of wheat bread, so every slice that crackled and puffed between my teeth was like a fresh start, a sign that I hadn't been dreaming.
So she spends 2 weeks gorging herself, doesn't try to find work, doesn't try to figure out what to do next. She just sits there and feasts. And I feel like, again, this is where the book is trying to sound more pretty because it's making up for a lack of story.
Which I honestly would not have minded this for her character if it recognized her character was just like her dad and was irresponsible with money. She got into the situation where, she had, which also makes me feel like you didn't ever work for money. She says that she picked up odd jobs, But the fact that she gets this money in her hands that she didn't work for and immediately just blows it on 2 weeks in a hotel and eating out of her mind.
Exactly. And
She's
not only
irresponsible with money. So I can't imagine that she ever had her own money to take care of herself and her dad.
And she said that she was going to be better than him.
I could absolutely get down with this character being completely irresponsible and being kind of just like her dad, and then being like, oh, shoot, maybe I shouldn't have been so hard on my dad because this is hard.
Yeah, like maybe recognize that like living is actually really hard, and you might have had a little bit better than you thought you would have had. Even though it's not much of a good life, but even still, like you didn't really have to do a lot of the ball breaking work that it takes to actually maintain any kind of living situation. And here you are at a hotel, gorging yourself on food that I don't know if you're even really paying for, because she did say the cook took pity on her, conveniently took pity on her, and then wasted all that money to begin with. Like she wasted all of it.
It was all food. Here we go. Quote, when I wasn't in the tub, and I often was, I was eating. Hunger wasn't new, of course, but it had always been a source of worry. Now, with my meals paid ahead and the anonymous cook on my side, every whisper of appetite was interest to me, an invitation to think about not what I lacked, but what I would soon have before me. I ate accordingly. Double potatoes of stew to be dabbed at with thick, crumbly biscuits, two or three chops at a time, nestled in lento shapes against a hillock of steaming potatoes studded with salt crystals, greens boiled silky and toad-colored, twining with beans that smelled of molasses and hid chewy burnt ends. I kept bright apples and stout wedges of cheese on my nightstand, let the big crumbs from hunks of cornbread pop into my bathwater, washed everything down with cool buttermilk. With
She
each
ate
meal
and
and
she was in the bathtub too.
Yep. With each meal and each well of and flow of tears, a bit of gnawing urgency lifted, and gradually I began to feel my feet on the ground once more. In the course of 2 weeks, I quite literally ate myself out of house and home.
She did.
She literally just ate the whole time.
This all she did was ate the whole time, and then she's sitting here ragging on her dad for basically probably doing the same thing as she's doing right now.
Yep.
And it's really tragic, because you could have had us like go around the town of Dodge and have her see what's going on in town. Like when she comes into Dodge, she doesn't even really describe it, because you would think that maybe she would be like, it's almost like an oasis after being on that prairie for however long she was on the prairie for. We don't really know or have a time frame for how long she spent out on the prairie, but you would think after being kind of fearful that you weren't going to make it or whatnot, but we don't ever seem to be fearful of not making it. But you would think that seeing Dodge in the distance, that's like being in the desert and dying of thirst and coming across an oasis, and you're hoping to God it isn't a mirage. So, I mean, her not actually even describing the city of Dodge kind of irritates me, because it's like there's probably a lot going on. It's a boom town. There's plenty of things going on. It's a cattle town. People drive their cattle through it. It's historic. And immediately she goes to a crappy hotel, which it kind of emphasizes the fact that it's not a very good hotel, but she's eating like a freaking queen over here. So you would think it'd be interesting. It was like all the food was kind of gunky and trashy, so I didn't really eat any of it, and I had this money in my pocket, but Bridget doesn't even seem to really care about money.
Well, if she's super hungry because she's been out on the prairie and hasn't been eating like much of anything, then I don't mind if she just doesn't even notice if anything is garbage or not. If she's just eating, I just wish, this is obviously a character flaw.
Yeah.
Because she ignores literally everything. She ignores her needs. She just sleeps, sits in the bathtub and eats. And half of the time she's still eating when she's in the bathtub. And it's not recognized that this is what she's doing. And she wasted her time, and she's given her dad a hard time for doing exactly what she just did.
Yes.
She doesn't go, oh, shoot, I need to be more responsible.
Not one moment she does that. In fact, like once she finally runs out of money, and then she's like, oh, I better find a job. She ends up finding a job. And of course, the person that is, that has given her the job is an asshole to her.
Not just that, but also, so you're supposed to believe that this chick has gotten jobs before and has worked jobs before. However, she has no ability to just comply and do her job. Quote,
no.
For a month or so, I scrubbed floors, chopped woods, and suffered mightily under the sour gaze of a Mrs. Mackey in her boarding house, which overlooked the cattle depot and stank of cow shit. She insisted that I wear a pair of her now grown son's old boots, which chafed and blistered me while their imagined cost came out of my wages. We hated each other immediately, and though she considered herself a Christian woman for keeping me out of the whorehouse, it only took a week or so to start clouding me with a broom handle whenever she'd mind to. I tried to bear it, as I had borne such things before, but the attic palate was hard, the food tasteless and insufficiently proportioned. More than that, I think something inside of me was plumed worn out. I had already spent too much of my life hauling and scrubbing under the pinched face of some stingy matron, and Mrs. Mackey's violent condescension turned out to be the last straw. One day I lost my temper, and when she reared back for a second blow with a stick of firewood, I swung the soup ladle I was holding and caught her right on point of her chin. The next thing I knew, I was out on my ass.
Yeah, so she's not very patient, obviously. Well, it's weird because her character is so inconsistent. This feels like just kind of like a shadow of a character. There's no real personality here. Like, everything is at a distance. I feel like I'm watching at the furthest distance there is of this character having these interactions that, by the way, we don't really ever see her having these interactions because we're just being told this is what happened, which, you know, not always a bad thing. But I feel in this instance, you probably should have shown us her trying at least, because it sounds like she's so put out with anything she has to do.
Yeah, and see, like the vibe I get from this is not somebody who lived in a shack and then had to like make her own way because her dad was busy doing other things, and so she was trying to cover the costs of what she needed. This sounds like a rich chick that got kicked out and is like having to work her first job.
Yeah, that's what it sounds
Even with the way that she's complaining, because she's personally filthy, or was filthy before she got here and got her hotel room that had a bathtub. But she's complaining about the smell of cow shit. But you had animals before.
Yeah, and you spent time outside with a mule. It's not clean outside. Like, it's like what Daisy was telling Marcella. It's like, you're not going to be very comfortable out here. There's always going to be a thin layer of dust all over your face, and it doesn't feel like you can get it off of you. But, like, you know, it's just, it's like she's just oddly met with, like, adversity, and instead of actually trying to, like, come over the adversity, we skip over it and are told a month's time goes by, and she finally had it to the point where she wields a kitchen ladle and bops this woman in the face with it, and then she gets kicked out. It would have been interesting to see her actually going around doing other odd jobs, or maybe actually kind of having a hard time finding a job because everything else is already well staffed.
Either well staffed, or people in that town were talking about her having an attitude, and so nobody wanted to give her a chance.
Exactly. Like, she could have made that mistake with Mrs. Mackey by hitting her with a ladle, and then Mrs. Mackey basically blackballs her from getting any real other, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? A real upstanding job that isn't a whorehouse.
Yeah, she just goes around warning everybody. Yeah, I hired that girl from out of town, and she was abusive and hit me.
She's wild.
Yeah,
her. Like,
she's a liability.
Like, look what she did to my chin. She got this little bruise on her chin.
And then I was talking to so-and-so who owns XYZ hotel, and or the inn over there, and he was telling me that all she did was come down at all hours of the day and just stuff her face. And when she left, the bedroom was a pigsty.
Yeah, actually,
with bread and crackers and cheese in the drain of her bathtub. Who is eating bread in the bathtub? Like, Miss Mackey could just take it to a 10.
This Miss Mackey has, like, set fire to the town, and everyone knows about Bridget. Busted Bridget.
There we go.
Busted ass Bridget. Like, it's true. Like, let her have, like, it's not ever, like, because clearly we're seeing her make mistakes by spending all of her money at that hotel and not even inquiring about a job while she's there for 2 weeks. But it never addresses it as a mistake, and it never really kind of dampens what she's doing. We don't actually get this sense of, like, emotion from Bridget about, oh, what am I going to do? I feel kind of lost. This is so much harder than I thought it was going to be. And actually kind of reflect on how, while her life was uneventful, this newer life that is not quiet, and is full of like different things that she's never experienced before. It's not the same thing as bartering out in the boonies of Arkansas that it is like over in Dodge City, which is a boom town and a cattle town. Um, it's busier there, and so she could have this like moment of like, I don't know how to keep up with this hustle and bustle, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know where to go, and I've tried everywhere I can possibly think of, but thanks to me getting mad at Miss Mackey and hitting her in the face, now I can't get work anywhere. Well,
See, and that would have been a great experience. Not a great, what's the word that I want? That would have been a great thing for us to see her actually do, going around and begging for a job or a chance with other people. And they're like, no, we've heard about you. And she could actually try to humble herself and be like, but I didn't mean to do that. It was an accident. I'm just blah, blah, blah. But we didn't get to see any of that struggle, any of her humbling, nothing.
And it would really make it a lot nicer or an easier segue for Lila, the madam, to approach her on the street, seeing this, she's not ugly. Maybe she saw Bridget get propositioned before by men, thinking that she was some kind of a sporting girl, but she denied them. So maybe Lila could have been watching her this whole time for 2 weeks.
That would have been something too. When we start out this book with her saying, she was too ripe to be left alone, but the entire 2 weeks that she's in Dodge City, she's not approached by anybody.
No, not at all.
She's just wandering around. She was avoiding it, running into any people at all when she was on the trails. But now that she's in Dodge City, where there's obviously whorehouses around, and she's a lone lady, you would think that maybe even some might either think that she's desperate because she's in rags, or assume and try to proposition her anyway.
Yeah, but no, nobody actually talks to Bridget. Nobody. There's no conversation outside of the conversation. Like, from the moment she gets to Dodge City to the moment Lila speaks with her, that whole period of time, there is not one conversation with one other person that's not Lila the whole 2 weeks she's in Dodge City, just sort of existing there and coasting.
And what would have actually would have worked? So this had another situation where something was done with this character that made absolutely no difference, which was her having money in the first place to get a hotel for 2 weeks, because it made no difference since she had no reflection on it, since it doesn't come into the story at all. She didn't meet anybody during that time. It just skipped over it.
No.
And it would have had the exact same result if back at her house, when her dad was like, I got these 2 mules and 20 acres. And she was like, Dad, show me the deed for the 20 acres. And then the guy that he made the deal with comes up behind, takes back the mules, kicks them out of their own house. And now they've got nothing.
Yeah.
So then she could have gotten to Dodge City all by herself, because they would have just had whatever packs that they had when they were traveling. Her dad died. She had no resources. Then she gets to Dodge City. She's hungry and she's desperate. And she actually would have been in a much better position to just go work for Lila, because she'd be desperate and hungry. And we wouldn't have wasted that 2 weeks with her being immature in the hotel that totally just messed up anything, because she judged her dad for doing that same thing. So kicked out of Mackie's place. Oh, that's where we were at. She runs into Lila. She's just like wandering around for a couple of weeks, not really worried about the dudes that she's looking at. She's looking at the whores, and nobody is approaching her. She's kind of just looking around for a long time.
Yeah. Kind of like notice her, and she's got red hair, she's pretty or whatever.
Some of them start hooting and hollering at her. And this is when we run into Lila. Where she goes, well, they sure like you, said a voice over my shoulder. I started and turned around to see a woman still young with black hair pulled up under a smart little top hat. She wasn't tall, but she didn't need to be. Under her arched eyebrows, deep brown eyes held me in sway with a steady gaze that clearly ducked to no one. Her rouged lips looked like a piece of heart-shaped candy, complemented by a deep red dress that looked far too fine to be worn out in all of the dust. I'd never seen anyone so stylish in all of my life.
Yep, and that's how we find. I love how, like, no matter what, all these females throughout the entire course of, like, her being at this brothel are all wearing red. Like, I feel like every other chance it got to describe what everybody was wearing, it'd be red. Like, there was green back then, pink, Blue? Did anybody have any kind of variety, or did you just
No, it's
dress
the
up?
lusty color. So he goes, I, I suppose I don't know. I stammered, feeling very young and shabby before her, relieved to be shod. Oh, so suddenly she's now shy after she was okay with smacking freaking Mackie in the face with a spoon.
Right.
She's like, oh, I feel so young looking at this lady in a red dress and top
Oh
hat.
my god.
Oh, yes, you do. They like you plenty. And what's more is you know it.
Does she though? Does she though?
I said
Like,
nothing, and she approached, closing the gap between us in 2 steps while she looked me up and down. She reached out a loose lock of my hair, rubbing it between her gloved fingers as if I were a bolt of cloth that she might buy. She was looking right into my face, scanning it carefully. I was used to having a woman look me over, but usually it was to judge whether I could lift her Dutch oven out of the fireplace. This one was looking for something else. Like a deer, I found myself getting very still, waiting for a sign as to what I should do next. You're a pretty thing.
well,
That red hair of
how
yours
even
stands out.
how would she even know the difference between what someone was looking for when it doesn't seem like she's had any kind of real social interaction at all her entire life? So I don't get this. It's just obviously a convenience.
She dropped the lock and grabbed my upper arm, running a hand down to my wrist with a series of light squeezes. You're skinny, though. We'll have to feed you up. Did she not just binge eat for 2 weeks?
I know she didn't gain any. I mean, maybe it takes a little bit of time to gain weight, but she binged eat for 2 weeks, and I don't know how long it was. She was. I mean, but then again, she binged eat, but it did say that she was working for like a month, so she could have
That's
lost
true.
what she gained.
That's true.
Um, so through that experience, but other than that, like we're gonna have to fatten you up or whatever. I'm just like, okay, well, there's food there. I'm there, and it'd be interesting if she didn't really know what was happening to her.
I want to see her go to the whorehouse and just pig out, and then the other
You
ladies
know,
are like, "Oh my gosh, Bridget." I
you have
want
no
to
manners.
see her take a dude back to her room, and he's like, "The frick is this? A stale piece of bread in your bed?"
Is this a sausage?
And
Is
she's
this
like, "Oh,
anything?
that's where that went."
What's that smell?
This already has more characterization than she does in the book.
I
Just
know,
make
right?
her be about
Bridget
the
loves
food.
to
That would
eat.
have made this so much better already. Just
You're like, oh, I'll do anything for food. You don't have to
have
pay
Constance go in
wages,
her
just
room
pay
later
for
and she'd be
food.
like, "What is that smell?" And then she like just follows it around the room until she opens the nightstand and there's like rotten cheese in the nightstand.
Yeah, that would have been.
Ah,
That could contribute to the fact that maybe she grew up and didn't eat very much, and so whatever food she's getting, she just wants to hold
Save
on
it.
to it. Yeah, save
Yeah.
it because you never know what could happen. And given her dad's the way her dad was, you'd think that, oh, well, anything could happen. I might want to save this food. And so she just kind of forgets about it, but then realizes, oh, something really stinks, opens the nightstand drawer, and there is a moldy piece of cheese.
That would have been so good.
It would have been so good.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, Lila goes, "Hey, I run a whorehouse. You want a job? You need a job? Good, because you're pretty. We could use you. We need a redhead. We lost our last redhead. Don't ask questions."
So she didn't even qualify to, oh, God, like they just needed a redhead. They didn't even want her because she looked pretty.
No, they were like, "We just need a redhead." She was getting
Yeah,
whistled at.
yeah, whistled at and stuff like that. But back then, women were not that cute. You see old pictures of them. They weren't. I mean, maybe there were some, but like you look at some of these pictures, I'm like, yikes, yikes.
We're gonna have hot or not 1860s version with
65, hot or
with
not.
Monty. Let's just collect. Okay,
Smash or pass.
yeah, that's what it's gonna be. 19. We go to the whorehouse and she meets some of the girls as they're brought in and whatnot, and then she can't be put out there without being tested first, is what we're told. So
Yeah.
they call up this guy named Roscoe to try her out, and the whole thing is just very detached and very sad. I don't know why Roscoe even agrees to it because
I know.
it's really just humiliating for him.
It is because like once they, and by the way, Kate, God, Bridget gets introduced to the actual madam of this establishment, the owner, which his name is Kate, and that's all we really know about her. And that she has like a laudanum addiction because she gets headaches all the time, and then she drinks all the time, and so like whatever. But they want her, and so they want to give her a little test drive, and so they holler up at poor Roscoe, the piano player, and then have him do her on a bed while they watch to see how well she does.
And she doesn't have any feelings or emotions about this. Like, as far as we know, she is a virgin and this is her first time, and she's having it made into a show.
Yeah, like there's no,
and it's this
so apathetic.
It's apathetic, and then it's like the same as later when she's slept with a bunch of guys because she just lays on the bed.
Yeah, she don't do anything. Apparently, there's no pizzazz in any of the performance that whatever performance she puts on for whoever comes into her room or buys her out for the hour. Like it's all just nothing, crickets.
And you can see, like, maybe this wanted to make her nervous or something, but it didn't bother to, like, be in the scene and describe it. Quote, though still mostly closed, I'd never felt more naked in my entire life. Roscoe must have seen it in my face. He was out of his shirt and trousers and stripped down to the waist, the sleeves of his union suit dangling like offals around his knees, while its lowest buttons strained over a bulge. I tried not to notice. He held out his hand to me, and I took it, letting him guide me onto the counterpane like a princess who'd been married off to a wild boar. Don't fret about them, he said. He shoved my petticoats up around my waist and leaned back to let me wriggle out of my trousers. The open air on my snatch made me jump a little, but not nearly as much as Roscoe's ham-streaked palm, which was soft and slightly damp as it traveled up my thigh and he pulled himself forward. There we go. I'll admit the sensations were strange that first time, though. But once he got into rhythm, Roscoe was easy to ignore. There was a cluster of knotholes on the ceiling beam that I gazed at absently while he set his post. Together, they looked like a face of badgers or a spray of daisies in a jar. At one point, I lifted my head and looked over Roscoe's heaving shoulders, where I caught a glimpse of Kate and Lila, who were watching us intently from the settee.
Oh,
so she's just staring at the ceiling. Even on her first time, she's like,
yeah, she's just laying there, just staring at the ceiling, like
this is a job interview.
You're failing. And then she like does like a little something that makes them like her or whatever.
Oh, Roscoe is like, at least pretend that you.
At least pretend
that you been like, you're trying to get a job, right? At least perform.
At least perform. Like, yeah, you don't gotta like it, but if you want money and you want bored, then like whatever. But no, like I felt bad for Roscoe. I'm like, there's people watching him. Like, that's just so uncomfortable. Like, why would you want anybody watching you?
There's people watching, and then this chick is just not engaged.
No, it's not. I'm like, wow, like you're probably.
How do you think that makes him feel? Like, you don't have to, but you're being paid to do this. Why would you not try to be like, I'm going to make him feel special. I'm going to be engaged.
Right. And then
what do you think your job is, Bridget?
Yeah, Bridget. And not only that, but she goes, I had a knack for whoring. And I'm like,
yeah, that's what it goes. The madams say that too. So they like finish, and then she's like, so I just did that. Can I have some dinner now, please?
Uh-huh.
And then the madams are like, see, didn't I tell you that I found a natural? And Kate is like, nah, a natty would have gotten fed before getting banged.
God, I hate them.
Of course, Bridget's got to be good at everything that she does, even when she's not good at it. Everybody's like, you're good at it.
I know, right? It's like, really? She didn't even do anything. She just laid there and let him ram her, and then he just was like, pretend you like it. Like, the only one that noticed was like Roscoe, and I felt bad for Roscoe. Like, ugh.
And at least they could have been like, that would have been better if they finished and she was like, so what do you think? And he goes, that was really bad. This girl is terrible. I mean, we can fix you, but you were like really bad.
I know. It's like you no emotion, no anything. Like, this is a maybe even make it like seem kind of like dire. Like, you don't get good at this, then like we can't take you on, and then you're going to have to find another job. Mm-hmm. And Bridget at that point it's been running out of options, and this is just her last resort, and then she better just get on with it and then try again.
Yep. And then Bridget could be worried that she's not going to have a job, that she's going to be out on the streets again, that she's going to be hungry, and that would have given her a chance to talk to one of the other girls, maybe even have Bridget show emotion by crying because she's worried. And then Constance, who could have been, like, this is in my version where it's better.
Yeah.
And Constance was also new, like the last new girl. And
Mhm.
she's like, you just have to do this and this and this. Here are the tips on how to do better and that I got and I'm doing better. I mean, even then, Constance has been there for a while at least.
I could not
So
stand
Constance still
like,
could have just given her tips to do better,
uh-huh.
but nope.
No, Bridget's got a handle on it, gang. Like, she can do anything. She can do anything. And yet, at the same time, she can't. But everyone praises her for it.
So now she's upstairs and putting on makeup for the first time and saying she's beautiful and strong like no other. Lila explains that once you screw, you need a wash in the basin between your johns. And Bridget doesn't like how she's being manhandled, but says nothing. It's like, what did you think you were signing up for? Lila literally manhandled you earlier when she met you.
Yeah,
And
she
now
did.
you don't
And
like that she's checking you out?
I know. And then not only that, but like, you had sex in front of these two women for the first time in your life. I'm only going to assume because, like, really, I think she probably was, but it didn't put any emphasis on virginity, which goes to goes to show me that, like, people want to treat virginity like it's no big deal. Whenever it's like, it actually is a big deal, and it should be special. Like, I think so, at least, but not some people watching you and then someone you don't know and you just don't care. Like, the sensations were strange. I think, like, you're being invaded, like, by someone you don't even know or have any feelings for. Like, I would have suspected it'd be super uncomfortable and awkward, and there was no mention of that. It's like, she's a strong woman and she can handle anything. She's 16 years old. Like, I know times were very different back then, but she's still 16.
Quote, hunger had brought out cheekbones that I'd never lose, while grief and worry had given my eyes a deep down shine that lent dimensions to any merriment that crossed them. Taken all together, I looked pert, but world weary, utterly irresistible.
You've barely known anything about the world. You still seem like you're like you're still like virginal in a weird way. Like,
Well, the world's wary is also weird because she's not though. Like me personally, if she got world wary by the travels that she had from her dad's house to here, especially after her dad died, we didn't see that. So what exactly makes you world weary? You were living whatever you could consider the highest life that you could, eating and just living in a hotel for 2 weeks. So what is world weary about you?
Exactly. Like, what are your
You were
travels?
staying at home previously.
I know.
So, like, what do you have?
And she doesn't have anything. This is just somebody trying to make this character seem like that they are experienced in something and have been working hard their whole lives. Whenever she acts like somebody who doesn't work hard at all, like, any person knows that, like, when you're working hard and you're living like day to day, essentially, you don't hole up in a hotel room for 2 weeks feasting without thinking about work, without anything. Like, I don't really understand because it's never really addressed what that was and why she was doing that. There's no real explanation for it. Is she grieving? Is she in shell shock? Is she what? Like, we don't know. Like, we don't know.
So after finishing with Lila, she goes down to the bar and meets a woman named Constance. Constance is rude at first, asking Bridget if she's ever done this before, and then mocking when she says that she hasn't until she bedded Roscoe. Constance asks if Roscoe helped her along, and she says yes. This makes Constance warm up because she had to have the same. They also only want Bridget because she's a redhead, and they were missing one on their lineup, apparently. She hooks up with another random cowboy almost immediately and is described in much the same way as her time with Roscoe. She just lays there until it's done. He wiggles his pants back on the same way, and then he leaves. She thinks about it, but she thinks about it this time where she didn't think about it with Roscoe, which was weird for me since Roscoe was the first time, but we get this with the second guy. Quote, there was a little swirl of dust as he hung up his coat on the peg behind my door, and another puff as his hat followed. He paid up without hesitation, and I didn't even take off my dress, just lay there on the counterpane and let him set to. When he was finished, I lay still on the bed while he tugged and wriggled back into his trousers. He was too shy to say anything, though, like Roscoe, he did tip his hat before slipping out the door. I waited a moment, wondering if I should feel different. Like all young girls, I'd had a lecture or two on the preciousness of my virtue and thought perhaps that I would mourn its loss. But instead, I found myself counting up all of the things that I hadn't had even just this morning. My belly was full, with more good smells coming from the kitchen downstairs. I could hear a trail of piano music overlaying a growing thrum of activity. There was money on my washstand, which I sat up and counted, letting the coins clink back and forth in my palm before I slid them into my pocket. So there was like more thought after this, where she actually mentioned being a virgin, where she did
Yeah.
it with Roscoe, which there should have been something with Roscoe. And then it could have, the second time could have like really solidified it because there was money, because she had been fed after Roscoe.
Mm-hmm.
So then you could have done that. But the fact that she's only acknowledging it now after the second time was weird to me.
Yeah, I felt that way too. I was sitting here, I'm like, hold on one second. Like it's not like this is your first time, Bridget. And another thing too, like when she's talking to Constance, Constance warms up to her by essentially saying, "Oh, well, like you did it with Roscoe. Did he tell you that Did he tell you to pretend to like it?" And then they both giggle about that, which I'm just like, okay, that's just mean. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, like, I just don't understand this whole brothel situation. She takes to it like a duck takes to water and had a knack for it. And I'm just like, you don't really seem like you do, because we're not actually, which I'm partially glad. I didn't want to read a bunch of sex scenes. I'm glad that there was minimal of that. But it was also just kind of drab. Like, again, it feels like she's coasting through this whole situation. She's yeah, like not really invested in anything that she's doing at all, like at all.
Yep, we get quote, I took to the whorehouse life like a duck takes to water, and within a couple of weeks I had all settled in at the Buffalo Queen. There was a lot that was new to me and a lot to like. The late nights, the music, the liquor, the being around girls my own age, the strangeness of men. Whoring is like any profession in that there's a knack to it, and it turned out that I had that knack. To me, men were like horses, mostly alike, but for some notable distinctions, and I cultivated expertise with an eye to increasing my profit. I approached each night's barroom herd like a horse trader appraising new stock. This one looked skittish, but could be tamed down with gentle words. This one could balk at the tight reins, but run easy under a little slack. That one was likely to kick and not be ridden at any price. So she's like only been doing this for a couple of weeks, and she already knows how to read men like an expert.
Yeah,
and have sex like an expert.
Really, Queen? Really? She does. It's like, where did this expertise come from? You doesn't sound like you were around people at all, like at all, your entire life up until you left Arkansas. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's just an excuse saying that she had a knack for it, but she never really runs into any real trouble. Like, she never ran into any kind of trouble out on the prairie either. Like, nothing. We just, again, we coast through really important things that could have happened. But I guess if the author is like intending to make this into some sort of series, then I don't care to read any more of it. Because if she didn't actually put in the time or effort that it would take to, create a namestay kind of flagship character for her series that is Bridget, then I have no desire to continue it, because there was nothing exciting about this book at all, which is really just sad, because Westerns are adventure novels, and that they can be dramas, but for the most part they're adventure novels. And this kind of was sold to us as some sort of adventure novel, because throughout the entire book, it feels like we're still stranded at the beginning of something. Again, like, I don't feel like time ever really passed. It was weird, like time passed, but then it didn't. But it always felt like we were still stuck at the beginning of the book, and there's half a book missing with the way it ends. I don't know how to explain it or describe it, but this feels like it needed more for me to really be invested in this character. Instead, again, it's just coasting.
And at this point, like, you're talking about a flagship character, and the book's name is Lucky Red, and we know that the character is red-headed. if there were more situations that were actually shown, like just interactions, not necessarily sex, but if there were more interactions in the bar with the guys, with her, somehow learning how to talk
Talk to
to
me.
guys in the right way, where then the other girls at the bar started calling her Lucky Red, or that other guys at the bar started calling her Lucky Red.
Exactly. But everyone
Something that would
calls
start
her-
giving that nickname, because the name Lucky Red never actually comes up. So the point, and nobody really refers to her as Lucky Red.
No, nobody ever does. In fact, nobody actually refers to her as Red until Spartan comes in. But yeah, like she's supposed to be a flagship character of this whatever series that she's going to make, if that's what her plan is. But I tell you right now, like I'm not intrigued by any of it. Like this is so like I think it's actually quite disrespectful to your character to put this little thought into it and then push it out there. Sure, all the wording and stuff is nice and the sentences are nice, but there's no emotion behind it. There's no depth in it. It's all smoke and mirrors to me. I feel nothing when I read this book. I felt nothing when I read these characters. I didn't get attached to any of them. In fact, all of them are completely interchangeable with one another. You could take one out and not notice they were gone.
So she's summarizing how she is with all of the Johns, and if they stayed too long, then they would start sharing their emotions. And she says that she talks about them having emotions with such detachment that she doesn't understand emotion or pain herself, despite being an orphan. Quote, "But though they mostly blurred together, there were always a few tricks that I liked just as fellows. Many of my buyers had a tendency to blurt out truths if I let them linger a few minutes after the deed was done, which baffled me at first. Some cowboy would lie out full length while his tool pulled back into itself, like a judge shrugging his coat on
God.
like a judge shrugging his coat on after adjourning the court. And before I knew it, I'd be hearing about how much this one missed his mama back in Texas, how that one's brother drowned crossing a herd through a river, or how some other just wished that his fellows wouldn't josh him so bad. At first, I marveled at these disclosures. I hadn't known much about men going in, but I'd always thought of them as a rather secretive bunch. As I got used to it, though, I started comparing notes with Constance and some of the other girls who confirmed that in such moments, some just come over all chatty."
Yeah, so again, like we're sort of with this whole bit right here, we're not seeing any of her interactions with guys that she's talking about. We don't see her laying in bed with like the guy who misses his mom back in Texas, or the guy who kind of wishes that his friends wouldn't bother him so much, or the other one that I pretty much forgot about. But all of them have their stories to tell, and it just seems like it's so weirdly enough like uninteresting to her. Like she always found them a secretive bunch, but I just don't get the sense that she's interested in what they have to say.
And I don't understand how she can be like, I just never really understood men, when she immediately took to whoring because she could understand how men operate.
Yeah, again, I ask like what is happening here? Like it's ridiculous.
So then we get into a rundown of everyone who works at Buffalo Queen. All of the girls come and go. Kate and Lila, who are the keepers of the girls, the other random workers, and Grace, this girl who fills the wash basins in each of the room and keeps her mouth shut, and has a scar across her face. So there's more exposition now as Bridget asks what Grace's deal is and who she is. She is told that Grace used to be a whore at a place down the street, but then she got into some trouble there, and one of her Johns like slashed her face, and now she's ugly, so she kind of got kicked out of her old job. And because Lila takes on charity cases, she gave Grace a job there, just kind of being the cleanup lady.
Yeah, which is sad because like I don't even really know why we're being introduced to a lot of these characters, because they're kind of like irrelevant. They don't do anything. I mean, they do stuff, but it's not like specific to them. I'm sure like if Bridget were left to her own devices in the brothel, she could just run it all by herself. She could do all the laundry. She could clean up everything. She could tend to the bar. She could sleep with all the Johns. She could like do everything, because that is how like little anybody matters in this story. Like,
then we get Constance talking about how she had been married to an undertaker, and then he had a decent amount of wealth, but then he had a gambling problem, and then he died and left her with his issues. Constance had to pay it off and got a job at the brothel for a little adventure. She said she got it for an adventure. Constance also reads because she's a well-educated woman, apparently.
Yeah, because every character that's smart is the one that reads books. There's always got their nose in a book.
And then there's more about all of the money that Bridget is making now, but she doesn't know how to spend it because she's never had money before. Bridget, you spent all of your money on food. How is she like, I have no idea what to do with all this money? Wouldn't she just be going to town and blowing all of her money on food
or snacks?
That would have actually made it make more sense as to why she didn't have a dress months into this. If she was just like, get money, get food.
Food.
Just every time, just so much food.
I just want food.
Oh, a missed opportunity. So the first payday that she got, she spent it on as much candy as she could get, and then ate it all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next time, Constance took her to a bathhouse for relaxing to show her just how to treat herself. Bridget said the last time that she'd taken a bath was at the hotel after coming to Dodge City. Why didn't we see Bridget taking the bath? Because she also talks about how she cried in the bathtub and just broke down in the bathtub and filled the bathtub with tears. But that was not actually in the book.
No, like we don't ever see any of them do anything like that. No taking baths. Anything that extends outside of like the overall bar room is like non-existent basically, unless it needs to be. And even when it is, it's like there's no real depiction of the town that they're in.
Constance is giving a little more background on Hugh Montgomery, who runs the Emerald, which is where Grace used to work at. And then Bridget is like, oh, I'm so lucky that I work at a place where that is not run by somebody that's like Hugh Montgomery, who sounds like a jerk.
Oh yeah, because Hugh Montgomery beats his girls, which you know, interestingly enough, or like allows bad things to happen to his girls, like, you know, getting slashed across the face with a knife. I'm assuming that's what happened to Grace.
Mm-hmm.
So just talking, of course, you know, obviously notice how, you know, it's run by a man and the women are being mistreated because the man runs the show over there.
Yep. And so then Bridget mentions how you need to take care of your eye when something happens to your eye. And Constance is like, whoa, how do you know that? And then Bridget's like, how do you not know how to take care of wounds? And Constance is like, well, I've always had doctor money. So we're supposed to go, oh, Constance was also privileged and way more privileged than Bridget. And so then this is when they go shopping so that Bridget looks less like an orphan.
And this is whenever we run into the fact that the shopkeeper and the shopkeeper's wife is actually talking to Constance because they're picking out Bridget a dress because Bridget has not bought her anything since she got to the Queen Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
And the shopkeeper immediately recognizes Bridget as someone that he slept with over at that brothel. And then the look on their faces is very obvious, and obvious enough for the shopkeeper's wife to notice. And as they're buying the dress, she denies them service and boots them out in front of a group of other women who are coming into the shop. And Constance drops something or whatever, and then someone tries to help her, and the shopkeeper's like, don't do it, she's a whore, or something like that. And it embarrasses the crap out of Constance. And this is like the first time Bridget is like seen Constance embarrassed or whatever. And they have this discussion. Like, that's what I remember about the scene primarily, was like it was just to show the girls getting beaten up on by other women.
Few choice quotes from this section were, she took me to the general store just north of the railroad tracks. I hadn't been that far into Dodge before, though the streets were just as dusty and the wooden sidewalks just as crowded. There was one notable difference: women. The streets on the south side belonged to men while they wove their way from one carouse to another. It behooved us gals to stay put, waiting in our saloons and parlors like jeweled birds and candlelit cages. But here on the north side, women, wives, mothers, unwed daughters, fresh as the dew, were everywhere. Respectable women in modestly dark, high-necked dresses milled about in twos and threes in and out of stores with their parcels and string bags, while children eddied around them, dashing back and forth along the sidewalks.
Oh, you mean the women who actually contribute something to society? Yeah. That's you know.
I had always pictured Constance acting boldly, standing at the center of Kate's parlor in her best shirtwaist, while she looked Lila full in the face. But as I followed her through the north side, it occurred to me that it had perhaps been quite different. Maybe she'd been shy, ducked her head, spoken too politely, and shown too much breeding. At the department store, she goes, wandering around the shop, I tried to enjoy the novelty of the place, looking over stacks of mixing bowls and flour sifters as though I'd never seen such things in all of my life. But I was bored by those tools made for the domestic life that only grew more and more abstract as my own continued down this other, more stimulating track.
What stimulating
She
track?
doesn't even like having sex. She just lays there.
Lays there. She has like it's like, oh, I'm excited by the outdoors, but then like there's no like moment of her actually going outside to enjoy it or looking out longingly at the empty fields that lead out of town, that lead to some unknown unlike explored adventure that she wants to be on. There's none of that. Like she doesn't want to go anywhere. She's just again coasting through this whole thing. It's like, oh, I can't be a wife because I'm too good for it. That's what this attitude is to me. This isn't like I just couldn't be a wife. I don't know if I could. I never really could. And she really couldn't be a wife. I mean, if you think about it, she's super selfish. She has
I
no.
mean, she was cleaning. One of her previous jobs was cleaning, and that would have given her more of a reason to be like, the domestic, I'm not sure that I want it because it makes me think of my dad. It makes me think of Mrs. Mackey. I don't think that I want that. But that's not
Yeah,
where
so she
we
just
go.
had negative experiences with cleaning. But cleaning is never fun. I don't care what anybody says. Cleaning is
We
never
get,
fun.
then we got Constance had frozen, as if without the protective walls of the queen, she were stripped naked. I realized that she was unused to this type of treatment, being looked down upon by matrons. While it was all too familiar to me, I spent the majority of my life bearing up under some mixture of pity and contempt from women who thought that their lives were better. They were better. For a moment, I was overcome with the same impulse that had not long before driven me to swing a soup ladle to the face of the boarding house keeper. And if not for Constance's sake, I might have taken a swipe at at any of the women who were now looking at us like we were no more than mud to be scraped off the heel of a shoe. How is it that Constance is like, I'm not used to being treated poorly for being a prostitute when she's been a prostitute longer than the 16-year-old?
I know, and I'm sitting here and just like, wait a minute, like I don't know what this is trying to say. Like it feels like it's a statement of some kind. Like this whole thing, like being a whore is good and exciting, but if you're a wife, you're just a whore that's just not getting paid for it. I'm like, oh my god.
Never mind those stuck up bitches, I said, as if we were already in the middle of a conversation. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were rimmed with red. She took a deep breath. They're no better than we are, I continued. She gave a single dry laugh. That's not how they'd see it. Then they're lying to themselves, I said. They fuck for bed and board, same as we do, only their tricks own them, body and soul. She looked at me for a long moment. I know you're right, she said. She looked up at the clear, blue sliver of sky visible between the buildings. The alleys stank as the alleys do. This one of the rotting onions and horse piss.
God, oh my god, that enraged me. I was sitting here thinking like, so no woman actually loves their husband. Like
Apparently.
that's
That's
apparently
cope.
no woman
Cope
loves
harder. This is just a bunch of prostitutes coping that nobody loves them.
yeah, that nobody loves them, but they're just being used for their bodies. And like, but even still, it's like we're like she even says like let's just like get drunk and fuck their husbands from sun up to sundown or something like that. It's very bizarre to me the way that this whole transaction went down. It just seems like sadly enough, that like it's like every like online likes to make out that women are so unhappy with being in any kind of relationship with a man that therefore they must be like just doing this for their own benefit, stay in like a house and be fed and taken care of, but they have no love for their husband. It's just like a basic online fantasy that I've seen over the course of years. It's just stupid to me.
Bridget then continues telling Constance how married women are all unhappy, which who is Bridget talking to? To like the 16-year-old is telling the adult woman who was married that all married women are unhappy. Quote, it's how things are, I said. I've been getting looked at like I was a two-bit no account whore since long before I was one. It's just what they're like. How do you keep from minding it? Like I said, they're no better than we are. They think it they can think it all they want, but all they've got that we lack is shirts to mend and noses to wipe and running beans to pick up before fall. And for what? They don't seem at all happy with any of it. Constance smiled at me. They do not. Does this book even remember that Constance was married?
Unless Constance was unhappy being married.
Well, it sounds like she wasn't when she was talking about being married to the Undertaker.
A lot of women can be very happy married. And besides, you don't even talk to these women. You don't even go on this side of town. So how would you even know that?
Like, well, that's just why it sounds like they're coping with
they're just
having what they don't have. Like, since it's first person, they can clearly be wrong. But that also ends up making it just seem like they're super bitter at what they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And just completing that by going, yep, let's go get drunk and fuck all their husbands.
Yeah.
The next chapter starts off by establishing a new relationship with someone that we've never met. Quote, it was not long before Sheriff Deputy Jim Bonney took to me. We all had regulars. Lila had the favor of Dodge City's second best doctor, which came in handy while a married shopkeeper always brought little bags of candy while treating himself to a visit with Arabella. Jim picked me out, just like he was choosing a fresh mount of a Remuda.
Oh, Jim Bonney.
We should have had the scene where Jim Bonney walked in and then met her.
Yeah, instead of just it telling us what happened, you know. Because, like, Jim Bonney's not a bad guy, like, at all. He's not.
Mm-hmm.
He seemed very sweet, but of course, like, all the men in this are pathetic in some way, shape, or form, or, you know, or kind of portrayed as being a little pathetic. So I was very... I was curious about how his character was going to be handled. So they basically take her upstairs to talk to her, Kate and Lila, about Jim Bonney, who've taken a liking to her. This is really, I think, the problems start to come in terms of like her being there.
So she gets with Jim Bonney and comes out of the room for breakfast when she hears Roscoe complaining about not getting a day off in 2 weeks. Then she's talking to Lila about Bonney because apparently Lila slept with him once or twice before, but she's too worldly because men like them innocent. And that's apparently what Bridget is.
After the following statement before, we're going to fuck all their husbands.
Then we got a quote. How was it? She said. What? The screw? Oh, yeah. Talking about innocence for Bridget.
Yeah.
So she comes down after being with Jim Bonney. How was it? Kate said. What? The screw? What else? It was all right, I said. Seems to know what he's after and how to go getting it. She snorted a laugh into her coffee. That he does, she said. You had him? I asked, not knowing what she meant. Once or twice, but I seemed too worldly for him, he asked. He liked the innocent types? To an extent. I'd wager that you're just the right amount of doe-eyed, but with a mouth on you. What's that supposed to mean? I grinned at her. She ignored me and continued. But he liked fucking you, you're saying. Seemed to. Did it to me almost 3 times before he wore himself out.
Oh my God.
Continually the best, continually complimented, and also the mouthy one that everyone likes.
Yeah, I don't remember actually ever seeing her be like mouthy in front of anybody else except for like they moved away from those women that judged them and kind of talked amongst themselves. So I don't really know what mouthy is because I haven't seen her interact in the brothel at all with anybody.
Yep, because she didn't even tell off those other girls. She just gossiped with Constance. So she wasn't mouthy.
Yeah, that's all she did.
Now, Lila explains to Bridget that Bonney is an important client because he keeps the area clean. So Lila says, keep him happy as long as he's seeing you because we need him to be keeping this place keeping this place well. This doesn't really make sense to me because regardless of whether he's going to the brothel or not, he is still the sheriff of the town. And if he's doing his job to keep the town safe, then there are still not going to be the criminals running around that then overrun the brothel later. The fact that they're like overrunning the brothel later means that they're being let into the town. So they wouldn't just be terrorizing the brothel. They'd be terrorizing everywhere.
Yeah, they really would be. So that doesn't make any sense at all. Like I thought about that as well. I was like, well, like him letting them into the town, like that's actually a big problem. Like, I mean, what about the bars and stuff? There's other places that they can go and saloons.
Yeah.
There's also other, brothels too. You got the Emerald down the way, and it's like, is he going to let them attack his people too? It's like, it's essentially like, if you let one rat in, like there's going to be 100 more. So it's really stupid to say that.
Since Bonney isn't paying because he gets the free brothel treatment because he provides them protection, Lila says that she's going to talk to Kate about cutting out how much Bridget has to pay them since she's the one that's catering to Jim. Skip ahead some time to being in the bar, bored one night, getting ready to push a John into talking to her finally when Bonnie comes in and makes his way to her. A bar fight breaks out, but the law corrects it before it gets too far, and then Jim returns to Bridget. Jim takes such a liking to Bridget, so the other girls start teasing her that she might become a jailer's wife. Bridget's starting to believe it, and Constance says that it doesn't really matter as long as the madames are happy. This is where it's at. Bridget, 16, is getting annoyed that other people are explaining things to her, and she goes, I know. The only reason the queen is staying open is because I am fucking Jim.
Wow, like
What
it wasn't staying open before her.
Yeah, right? What were they doing before the great and powerful Bridget got here?
I know, right? Like, come on. And also it indicates that Jim probably had someone before Bridget was there. But at the same time, I'm like, well, if he didn't have anybody there, then how come there aren't any vagrants there before she gets there? Like, I don't understand that.
They're talking about what all Jim does for the brothel, which not only keeps the vagrants away and the criminal people away, but also keeps the township busybodies away. And Constance is explaining how Jim keeps the taxis from being levied against them at the brothel. She says, Dodge is trying to get civilized. Movements on the north side for temperance, suppression of sin, what have you. Decent, God-fearing women with a snort, and Constance nods. Decent, self-deceiving women, though the letter of the law is on their side. Clearly, the only good people in existence in this society are the whores. That's what is kind of being implied here.
Yeah, I would say so too. And I'm just like, we haven't really met another woman outside of the brothel, so like I can't really.
Only the wife that got cheated on, and then the random women.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just like, if I were the woman, I'd probably boot them out too. I'd probably skin them alive, actually, and then I'd rip his arm off and beat them with it. That's what I would do.
The bar is pretty empty, so they drink and the scene ends. Skip to Jim Bonnie coming in with a black eye, and he sits down with Bridget, quote, with 2 fingers. I turned his head to one side for a better look, then drew my fingertips lightly down along his jaw. Too many men are unused to tenderness. The lighter the touch, the quicker they're undone, and I saw Jim's lashes flutter for half a moment before he came back to himself. She knows that she's playing him.
Yeah, she knows she's playing.
You don't touch somebody like that and then be like, how do you have feelings for me? Gross.
I know. Like, girl.
All of a sudden, Bridget is this hard-talking girl. Like, she's been working the brothel forever. She's been there for maybe like 3 or 4 months at this point.
Yeah, I know.
She's interrogating Jim about the trouble that has come in that gave him the black eye. A couple of outlaws that got into a fight over money when one of them blew his load and then tried to get more money off of his partner. They got into a fight at the Emerald and he had to break it up. A bunch of people got arrested, but the situation is under control. So they go upstairs and have sex. All the while, Bridget's just up there fantasizing about what it would be like to get into a fight and kick a butt, because apparently that's what she cares about. Cool.
Yeah, randomly too. When that happened, it seemed like it was super out of nowhere.
It was. She's just like, I suddenly have a bloodlust. Quote, even so, when I think about that night, most of what I remember is the story Jim told me. Well, he got what he came for. I cooed into his ear and let my mind wander, filling in the details of the fight, the meaty smacks of fists into jaw, bright splashes of flying glass, blood flying into arcs through the air. I wondered where Hugh's girls had been through the melee. How much had they seen? Behind Jim's shoulder, I clenched my hand into a fist and looked at it, trying to picture my little paw shooting forward and connecting with some stranger's grimy face, knuckles scraping on an unshaved chin.
I hate the mentality that women think that they can overpower men.
She's having sex with Jim right now, actively. And she's looking at her fists around his shoulders and being like...
It's true.
She's wondering what it's like.
He's practicing, but he's not even paying attention. He's just having the time of his life. And she's like, pew, 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 pew.
Yeah.
Their tiny little fist. Yeah, I can see that too.
Is that stale bread? Oh, yeah, there's that slice of bread. Some girl named Sally shows up and then is immediately welcomed and given room by Lila. Bridget is judging her as not being pretty and doesn't trust her.
Yeah, I thought that was really weird. I'm like, what?
It's the Bonnie syndrome, where you know that Clara's a bad person, even though Clara's gave you no reason to think that she's a bad person.
Yeah.
She also judges her for not working the first night that she stayed, because Sally just got to stay the first night. Hello. I'm pretty sure they don't have to work every single night.
I don't don't think so. It just depends. I'm not very well versed in this. Like, I can tell you right now, in terms of like brothels and stuff, like, I don't know if they worked every night, but I know that there were nights that were more active. Like,
Somebody, I assume if somebody comes in, like just travels in that day,
yeah,
like it depends on if it was Hugh Montgomery, then he probably would have been like, get to work, ho. But they've already
yeah,
talked about how Lila and Kate are not the same brutal. And so then I could see them being like, oh, Sally, you're back. Well, here's your thing. You can just get all comfortable tonight, and then tomorrow you can start work.
yeah. Like, I see what you're saying right there.
Sally says that she is heading to California because she wants to become a star. And Bridget judges her for being unoriginal in that too, because, oh, wow, another person wants to be a star. Quote, cool weather for one thing. I knew a gal went out there, said there's always a breeze coming off the ocean. She went on to describe the wonders that she anticipated. Sally's fantasy contained no trace of originality. She spoke about the same steep hills, exotic strangers, and ships bobbing in the harbor as anyone else who yearned for California. I paid no attention for the vistas that she spun out. Instead, watching the easy grace with which she slung a brandy glass between her long fingers.
Yeah, I thought, girl, like, how are you excited about other people's adventures? But then whenever it's like, oh, her story just wasn't original. Like, well, yeah, most people wanted to go out there for that reason.
Yep.
Stupid. Like, oh my gosh.
You didn't even need to judge Sally. Just be like, okay, but let's add some arbitrary, just like hating on Sally for no reason. Once Sally says that she wants to sing in California, everybody's like, sing, Sally, sing. But she doesn't want to. Yeah. They keep pressuring her, but she barely gets, she does get away without having to sing to everybody because the thirsty men come in, and so the ladies have to get to work.
Yeah.
Bridget is then hanging out with Constance that night, or on her night off. And they have a night off.
Yeah. Because of the purse.
Yeah, so Bridget is hanging out with Constance, and she's asking where Sally is. Lazy writing is going on here as Constance is like, you know that she's in the next room. Oh, yeah, I called it lazy writing because it's the, like, as you know, Bob, because the character would already know. But she's got to ask this question so that the reader gets told, because there's no natural way that this author wants to just show this information. From the room, she hears feet and opens the door to see Sally coming in with an undertaker. Bridget's immediately judging this guy because he didn't want her.
Yes. She does say she's very unhappy about that. And so she starts peeking through the crack in the wall.
Quote, I heard feet coming along the catwalk, and then I opened the door to admit Sally and a trick, a man in a black frock coat who I recognized as the undertaker from the north side of town. I hadn't ever serviced him myself. He took me as unrefined, but I knew him by sight as a stiff, too uptight man who used the length of his nose as a high vantage point from which to stare down at the rest of us. He'd had taken a liking to Sally, however, and he'd already paid her several calls. She's over here going, his nose is so long, he judges us from it. And then she's over here just like, that guy is so uptight. Screw that guy.
I know, she's the one judging him. He's made judgments on everybody. Like, girl, please, pot calling the kettle black here, please.
Bridget goes, she's got John Bourne. John Bourne can go straight to hell and ask for a glass of water, Constance says, still refusing to look up. She detested the man, for it had been he who'd held the mortgage on her late husband's business and had taken no pity on the young widow. Right you are, I said out of loyalty. She said out of loyalty? Is that her being like, look, I don't actually agree with you, but out of loyalty, I'll say I agree.
Right?
Bridget is so fake, man.
Bridget is very fake.
So, of course, Sally is having this man that they all hate because, Sally is the lightning rod of hate. Let's not pretend it means anything against Sally.
Oh, yeah.
She's just doing her job. But the rest of you should learn how to freaking do.
I know.
Plus, wasn't she just complaining how Sally wasn't going to be working, and now Sally is like doing the job with the kind of guy that clearly Bridget doesn't want to sleep with?
I know, and she's mad about it. Like, okay, I thought you didn't want to sleep with this person.
So now Constance, because of the way the rooms are set up, Constance and Bridget can watch Sally in the neighboring room through a hole in the wall. Yeah. And they're impressed by how beautiful she is and how good her form is as she's doing the do.
They're being little perverts. Bridget and Constance were like, oh, I see.
And then Constance says that Bridget is getting soft, and she gets offended and starts snapping and tells her to shut up. You think you know everything, but all you've got is book learning, and it ain't all there is to know. You think that you're smart, but your world's stupid.
God, I was like, that is such a 16-year-old girl's like plight right there.
Like, I'm 16 and I'm deep.
I'm not a kid anymore. I can do what I want.
So since when has Constance shown herself to think that she is better than anyone, by the way? She's getting lectured by the 16-year-old for thinking she's better. Since when? She's turned to Bridget for comfort and knowledge every chance that she's gotten, including back at the store when she was made to feel bad.
Yeah.
Whatever. So they go downstairs and drink, continuing to judge Sally and hating on her appearance as a blonde, being pale, and not being attractive enough, according to Bridget. To me, it just feels like Bridget is insanely jealous of Sally, her beauty, her easy nature, and how she doesn't seem to be high-strung. Quote, it was something else in Sally that drew the eye. She never hurried, moving as though she had all the time in the world, like sap that could run slow or fast, but wouldn't be told. And she had a way of making you feel like you were right on the verge of impressing her, that any moment now you'd say or do the thing that would win her over. She was just then wafting slowly through the room, pausing to murmur something to Lila that made them both crack up, while the rope knot in my center just pulled itself tighter and tighter.
So the first like real hint of attraction here is happening.
Oh, see, I read that as jealousy, because she's like, Sally is succeeding, Lila likes her, they're over there giggling and telling jokes to one another. All of the dudes like her. She's got this air of ease about her. And so then I'm looking at Bridget, looking at that and being angry. And I just see Bridget being jealous.
Right.
I mean, I could see how it could be taken as attractive.
No, it's not clear at all. And I was like, what does this mean? Is she attracted to her? Or is she jealous of her? And so I decided to go with like, she's turned on. And she doesn't know what to think about it.
So Bridget is watching Sally and having her emotions when she's interrupted by Sheriff Jim Bonney talking to her, asking her what she's thinking about. Roscoe and some other guy named Langley just start fighting for Roscoe playing the piano.
No reason.
But that is interrupted really quickly, and it doesn't change anything. And I'm pretty sure then Jim Bonney and Bridget go upstairs after that.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the end of that.
Oh, yeah, they also use that moment for Jim to ask who Sally is, because she's singing over there with Roscoe playing the piano.
Yeah.
And then Bridget says who it is, and then Jim is like, oh, well, she would be prettier if she could sing in tune. So, like, we just needed an extra moment to just insult Sally for no reason.
Like, self-snitching on themselves about this character.
Who hurt you, author?
I know, right? What the heck?
So yeah, Jim and Bridget go upstairs, and then she apologizes to Constance later, and Constance randomly takes the opportunity to insult Roscoe by telling Bridget to close the door. Quote, I get enough of his tinkering as it is. So apparently, like, listening to him piano is terrible as well.
I know. I feel like I get a real sense of like, these people are so close and they're super close enough to be like family. And I'm just like, come on, guys. Like, I don't know. I just felt like there was so much resentment towards.
There was so meanness.
There was a lot of meanness. It absolutely was a lot of meanness.
Let's skip a couple of days. If Bridget is making money and likes counting it in her spare time, because that's her hobby, apparently.
Yeah.
She mentions that this is because she keeps the money in her room so that she can count it whenever she wants, instead of giving it to the madams to keep safe in their office. However, bad luck struck one night when a John returned after he was done for no apparent reason. Like, we're given literally no reason. She's like, I saw him off. He started walking off, closed the door, started counting my money, and then he just came back. He didn't forget his hat. He didn't forget anything.
No, not at all. He just
comes back and takes the cigar box of money and then makes a run for it. This turns into a fight down in the bar that ultimately Bridget gets a scratch on her face that's going to turn into a scar. Yeah. And they're like, it's okay. When that heals, you'll just look like really sexy and wild. How come this one gets a scar on her face and she's like gets to continue being a whore, but Grace has to just clean out the cum buckets?
Yep, that's what Grace gets to do. Grace, I don't know if it's because the scar is just more significant on Grace than it would be on Bridget after it healed, but I just thought it was like, oh, of course, Bridget can have a scar and it'd be sexy, but not Grace.
After the whole thing with the fight in the bar, Sally comes and talks to Bridget and is like, you should get a gun. And like shows her where she keeps her gun inside of her dress. And Bridget is like, oh my gosh, she has such a sexy body.
She does. She's got like a perfect body.
Well, Bridget, sounds like you were jealous before. Then Bridget goes to bed. Now Bridget is watching Sally work again. I think she's got a bit of an addiction.
This is where I thought she was just like getting turned on by Sally, because she kept watching and focused more on Sally than she did on the man who was with Sally.
Yeah, and I mean, and she's not daydreaming about Sally's body, so she is thirsting for Sally now.
Yeah, and she's like not really even kind of being like, why am I thinking this way about a coworker or another woman, like at all? It just does not faze her.
And so then Sally comes in and is like, hey, let me help you with your hair. And also, I know that you're watching me through the wall, you little creep.
That was hilarious. She came in and like, you can take anything you need, but don't take any more from me. And then like licks her earlobe or something like that, and then leaves the room. And then like freaking Bridget just avoids her for a couple of days.
She's so embarrassed.
What's happening?
After she avoids her for a couple of days, because obviously that doesn't even matter. It's just in the narrative to say she avoids her a couple of days, but then she's back on it, following friggin' Sally back to Constance's room so she can watch her through the wall. This time she's watching the John slap the crap out of Sally. And be a little bit rough. He's not slapping the crap. I should just say he's just being kind of rough. And so Bridget has never seen a guy be rough before. And so she gets super worried and runs into the other room and then attacks that guy. And then that guy starts attacking Bridget. And Sally grabs her gun and shoots him, because it's Bridget attacking him that really sets him off. And so then Sally actually shoots the John to protect Bridget.
Yeah.
And actually gets in trouble for doing this. And she gets sent away because she is in trouble with the law. But fortunately, they have a good relationship with Jim. So then Jim is like, we can pull
some strings.
We can spare Sally from being punished, but she does need to leave. And so Sally has to pick up and leave.
Yeah.
Then it's all Bridget's fault, because Sally was like, yeah, he was being rough, but I have had worse before, and he paid, and he was going to help me get to California. And now I don't get any of that, and I have to leave. So thanks for getting in my business, Bridget.
Yeah, Bridget.
Oh, but she's like, but he had a knife. And she's like, they all have knives. They're all dangerous, Bridget. Are you that dumb?
Yeah. Really, it's like, what do you expect? Like, it's the frontier. It's like there's a lot of dangerous people roaming around, and like the sheriff can't be there for everybody.
Yep.
You can't. That's just like insane to push your luck with the sheriff to keep out people who are, look suspicious or dangerous. Whenever it's like anybody can be dangerous no matter how they look. It was just a stupid like part on Bridget's behalf. I think she should have just waited to see if Sally could write it out, and if the guy pulled his knife on her, then maybe that's when she should have run in, but it didn't happen that way.
Yep. And it felt like really weird to me, because again, we got this inconsistency where sometimes Bridget is super knowledgeable and is like, I've been doing this forever. And then other times she's like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I need to be the one to save everybody because I know better than anybody else inside of this brothel.
Yeah.
Also, why was that door not locked?
Oh, yeah. That's another thing, too, because they do lock the doors to prevent other people from walking in on them, because there could be, men get excited, and especially during that time, and you never know who could walk in. And I just can't imagine, like Bridget hadn't experienced like a rough John yet, even someone who was just a little bit rough. Like, is the sheriff really keeping out all those dangerous people from the brothel? Come on. That's just like,
she just getting soft boys, like completely soft boys. Really?
Yeah. Like, really?
So Sally goes away, and Bridget is like heartbroken and paying for the brothel's loss, because Sally was actually really good for business, and now they have to pay. And so she's doing extra chores, partially to apologize, partially just to stay busy. Suddenly, Grace is also a bad person, just watching Bridget to see if she could mess up the chores and then tell her how to do the chores correctly. But, Bridget knows how to do laundry.
Yeah, Bridget already knew how to do all that stuff, so it's not like... But then the whole laundry thing, I'm just like, does she really know how to do laundry? Because she didn't really have that many clothes.
Yeah, she was doing chores in other places. So I would just take that she knew how to do laundry.
Yeah.
So Constance's client, Pierre, has now come for a visit. We've never heard about Pierre before, but apparently he is very, very close with Constance. That he even stays the night in her room. And no other client gets to just spend the night in her room. He's also got a little shack that he gets to like stay in, or a little room closet, whatever.
Yeah.
That he gets to stay in, but it's really just his stuff stays in there. And then he goes and stays the time in Constance's room.
Pierre was really like, like whatever character. Like he's not important.
Because it didn't develop anything with it. Obviously, these two have something going on. And I think that it could have been an interesting point of conflict with Bridget, who obviously thinks that marriage is stupid, but Constance doesn't, because one, she was married before and she was still, I mean, maybe she's hated the Undertaker for putting her in a bad position after her husband died, or maybe she was mad at the Undertaker for the way that he mistreated her and her husband. We don't really know, because it doesn't really go into it that much.
Yeah.
But she's got this relationship with Pierre that it tries to go, oh, it's intimate, but it's friendship, but it's intimate.
But
because later, when Pierre dies, spoiler alert, the novel refers, or not the novel, but Bridget refers to both Lila and Constance as widows.
Yeah, like I thought that was interesting. Like the whole Pierre thing and him dying was like, okay, like I didn't care about that. But it's sort of like Constance's attitude is so inconsistent, just the same as like Bridget's is. Like I don't really get a sense of like strong characterization from them. Like I said earlier, they're all interchangeable, and not one of them sticks out at any point, at any time.
Pierre is here. Everybody loves him. He's a really nice guy. Who favors Constance more, has a friendship with her. And so everybody wants to celebrate Pierre's visiting, and they go to find Bridget so they can introduce Bridget to him. But she's like, I want to do chores. They're all so happy. I'm jealous of that relationship. I don't want to be part of this. But they eventually find her in the yard doing laundry and are like, come inside. And she's like, fine. But it says she wants to get away from the, quote, bubbling joy.
Oh my God. Yeah, I thought, come on, Bridget. Like, you spent half the time hating Sally, so why are you this disappointed that she's gone?
There's that too.
Guilty? Like, why? Like, this makes no sense to me.
Then as she's hanging out with Pierre, that he talks about there being a gunfighter in Aberdeen who was a woman. Bridget excuses herself because she doesn't want to be around Pierre and Constance anymore since she's jealous. And then Lila catches up to her and tells her to mind her manners. Constance doesn't have many regulars because she's just too dang smart, and men don't want that.
Yeah, which is really weird too. Like, she don't have too many regulars, but like I remember the book distinctly saying that Constance actually kind of had a pretty decent pull, and would get a lot of customers, but I guess not any regulars. But how many regulars are actually coming into the brothel anyway that aren't Jim Bonnie,
or the Undertaker?
Or the Undertaker. Well, the Undertaker's girl is gone, so like he can't show back up. It's over.
So now we time skip to the fall, and there's going to be a snowstorm in October. There's some gossip going around about a troublemaker named Otis being brought into town. He's going to get hanged. And Bridget does some tricks, assesses random people. Like, we're just time skipping. She and Jim turn in and have some time together. She gets all cozy with him, and he likes to kind of act when they're together like they're a married couple already. So he's just super cozy when they've got time together.
He's very nice to her.
He calls her beautiful. She complains about how intimate he makes things. And then once they're done, he says, don't you ever get tired of this? And then asks her to marry him. She's like, then what? Everyone would know that you've married a whore. And he's like, we could move. And she's like, but you would know. Clearly, he doesn't care.
Yeah, he doesn't care. Like, he's fine with not keeping you a secret, like, at all, because he likes you so much, but you basically just let him on this entire time. Like,
which, fine, you're a working girl, but you can just say, I am a working girl. I would just rather be doing this.
Yeah.
Don't be like, it's like in freaking Guns and Smoke when Jesse was like, I love you. And Bonnie was like, no, you don't. Do not tell other people how they feel.
Yeah.
Do not, if you want to reject them, then reject them yourself. Don't project or assume somebody else's feelings and tell them, oh no, you don't actually care. You don't actually want me.
Oh, yeah.
You would know that I'm a whore and you're judging me for it. No, he is obviously not judging you for being a whore. He wants to marry you, and he will move and give up his job as a sheriff here for you.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, she should have taken it. That's all I'm gonna say. Like,
Especially with how often the other girls in this place go, "Oh, you're a whore and you'll never be anything better." Oh,
exactly.
look, then here is your unicorn, and you're telling it no, and then none of the other girls are like, "Bro, what are you doing?
Yeah, she didn't
This
even
is
tell
your way
anybody.
out of the life."
Yeah, like any girl would give up that position. Most of them would in a heartbeat. You know, if any guy came in there and was like, "I want to marry you, I want to take you with me," they'd be like, "Okay, let's go." And just to try their luck that way. That happened a lot, actually. There are a lot of women who did start out as whores, but then got married later on because of their Johns. They wanted to keep them.
So now we are getting into a long winter with a lot of snowstorm going on, and the snowstorms mean more people are coming inside the bar and the brothel to stay warm, and so that means more business. Lila's getting on Bridget for being lazy and not doing her job well enough, so then she goes back to the bar. There's a cat on the loose in the bar randomly.
Oh yeah,
Like there's just so many random things that don't mean anything.
I know. It's like, come on, like this is so like in like what's the word I'm looking for? This is so like inconsequential. Like there's no reason for a cat. It's just like this fake
In the
sort.
middle of the snowstorm business, whatever, and now a cat's just running loose.
Yeah. Oh, they're hard to come by out here. I'm like, a cat? Oh my god. Okay.
And then a woman dressed as a man walks in and is like, "You girls all right?"
Uh huh.
Oh, oh, look, it's finally Bridget is shook by this beauty of a person assessing her like mad. Also, they're all a bit shook because the cat is on the loose still.
Uh huh.
The frick is the cat? We
And
don't
this
get
was
any closure on the cat, by the way.
no, we don't. Like I don't remember what happened to the
It
cat.
pretty much disappears after this.
He like jumped out of somebody's like little duster or something like that and just started causing chaos, but then he disappeared.
Yup. So this is Spartan Lee, the gunslinger that the article was talking about. How much story has happened at this point?
Yeah, this is like 50% of the way through this book when Spartan Lee finally enters the picture. And Bridget is just so like struck by her, despite the fact there's no real emphasis on her appearance, the same way there was as Sally's.
Spartan is in town because of Otis, that bad guy that is going to be hanged. She's the one that bounty hunted that guy and brought him in. And so she's here to wait until the hanging so that she can collect her money, which I don't really think that's how that works, but okay.
No, I think you usually, I'd have to think about it. I think you usually got paid pretty much up front.
That's at least if I'm going off of Red Dead, you bring in the people and then you get paid, and then it's up to whatever the law decides to do.
I would have to like look into it further. But I do know that I feel like people did get paid before Spartan shows up, actually, or Spartan's around bringing in the Lee gang. They refer to them as the Lee gang. It's like, oh yeah, it's those Lee brothers and their Hellcat sister. So they're not necessarily even like strangers to the area either. Because I remember that bit before, like I think she actually officially meets Spartan. Because they're talking about how Otis Shy had gotten caught by a Lee, and they were worried about how like, oh well, what about all the other members of the Otis Shy gang are going to show up and like get him out of his hanging. But then someone mentions like, oh well, they scalped those guys or something like that, and they're all dead because like Spartan Lee came in with like scalps. I don't know, but either way, like so the Lees are like not. I don't know if they're necessarily from out of town, or at least if they are, they're still notorious in the area for bringing bounties, I would assume. But this is the first time we've actually started hearing about the Lees. Like there is no mention or foreshadowing of Spartan at all in this book.
Spartan is, after she makes sure that the girls are okay, whatever, with the cat thing, she's like, "Hey, you want to go upstairs, redhead?" And Bridget's like, "I don't know if that's allowed." And then she runs away very quickly with the man.
She does.
Then we're going to skip forward some to there's going to be some party in town and everybody is gathering together. I think it's a party to celebrate the hanging of Otis that is coming. And so Bridget goes upstairs to get dressed in some party outfit because she's not allowed to wear one of her whorehouse outfits.
Yeah.
Those belong to the whorehouse, which also sounds dumb because the ladies of the whorehouse are like, go, don't do any of your work there for free, advertise our whorehouse. So you'd think that it'd be okay if they wore basically what it is, their uniforms.
Oh yeah, unless it's cold outside or something, because they didn't wear very much, obviously. But I don't know. But
that didn't come into the consideration at all for even the outfit that she puts on. So
no.
She's like, oh, the only thing I have that's not one of my whorehouse dresses is the rags that I appeared here in. I can't go to the party because I just have rags. Fine. And it's just like, how have you been here for so many months and you only tried to buy a dress once? Otherwise, you just counted all of your money.
Yeah, and everyone else seemed to you counted all your money. It's not like you're not without it, and you counted all of it. But not only that, it just surprises me. It's like, well, is there other general stores in town that you could go to? Because clearly all the other girls are getting dresses.
Or at the very least, she just sends Constance or somebody else to go and get her a dress.
Yeah, I mean, really, or someone maybe the shopkeeper hadn't seen before, if they want to actually go and do business with them. I don't know.
It's whatever. This is another one of those inconsequential things because she's like, I don't have any clothing. And then Constance is like, well, here's a dress. You can have one of mine. And then she's like, okay, cool. And then it's solved. So it doesn't impede anything. That doesn't change their relationship. It doesn't do anything.
No.
They got Constance comes in and is like, and Bridget's like, oh, all bookish girls love to dance. Now she's at the party and dancing with people.
Dancing with Jim, and Jim apparently being...
Oh, yeah, that's right. She dances with Jim for a very long time.
So embarrassing. She can't stand it. And then she's mocking her friend for actually having a fun time with her not boyfriend, Pierre. Eventually she runs into Spartan Lee again, and Spartan Lee takes off with her.
Spartan asks where Constance is. And so she goes, oh, with the Frenchman. Yeah, she's real smart. Spartan, I hope she's not too smart. What do you mean? And that's where that ends. Because then Spartan asks about Jim and is like, that guy got you in a mood? And she's like, yes, the guy that's stalking me has got me in a mood. Shortly after, that's about the time where Spartan takes Bridget behind a building and fingers her. And after she's done orgasming and is like, oh my gosh, what is this thing? I have no idea what this thing is. She hears Roscoe and Grace running off together to go and do
whatever.
Because apparently they're an item and it's never implicated anywhere else.
And it's never even touched on again either. At all. Spartan, she wants to get hot and heavy with Spartan again, and then Spartan's like, no. And then just leaves.
Later.
Dang, Spartan.
You want to do it again? Nah. Bye. In hindsight, that's a little funnier.
It is funnier. It's I can't even begin to she has no idea what an orgasm is. Maybe she never actually had one, but she works in a brothel. It has to be talked about at some point. They've had to mention something like that happening.
But some of the other girls.
Yeah, some of the other girls.
But we would freaking know that if she didn't skip through months and months and months of being in the brothel to what, for what reason. There's this was one of the things that messes with the setting is that because it spends so much time skipping, you don't get a feeling for the place, for the characters, for the relationships. And that's one of the other risks when you're constantly skipping through things.
Yes, that's why I said this book could have benefited from at least 200 more pages, or it actually maintained its focus on something. I don't know. It's ridiculous.
So now the execution is going to happen. The guy is showing no remorse for raping, killing, and burning down a campsite. As things are about to go down, he makes a run for it. But you know what? Good thing Spartan is still there because she chases him down and shoots him in the back, and everybody is celebrating and drinking and goes, hey, Spartan. The Cowboys. That's what it was. The Cowboys are like, hey, Spartan, great job. Let's go and get some brewskis at the whorehouse on us.
Yeah, not to mention Spartan I think jumped off her horse or something like that to get him.
I just imagine a front flip a bunch of times.
I just imagine Spartan being super short and sitting on a giant horse and then flying off it like she's like a dwarf or something.
So we got, quote, I could have sworn I heard Arabella's eyes rolling in their sockets as her door clattered shut, and I slipped into my room to change and grab a last moment's peep to grab a last moment's peace. Leaning against the clattered door, I pressed both hands against my heart to see if I could feel its clanging against my breastbone. I thought of the practiced, easy strength with which Spartan Lee had stood up in the stirrups to shoot, the effortless flip of the gun in her grasp. I held up my own palm and looked at it, wondered how much a Colt weighed anyway, and if the barrel had felt warm or cool when she grabbed it. My gut tightened like a rag at the memory of the killing blow. I chalked that up to the night's liquor, ignoring the shiver that longed to work its way through me. There came a rap on the wall from Constance's room. "You about ready?" she called out. So she's just in here daydreaming about killing people.
Yeah, so it's not even about Spartan. It's about
totally normal.
killing people.
Now that Spartan has been introduced, Bridget is totally obsessed. She's looking around, waiting for Spartan to come through the doors, even though she's probably not going to say, "Hey, yeah, let's go upstairs," because she thinks it's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
But she's hoping that Spartan does come through the doors, and she's hoping that Spartan notices her, but Spartan just totally overlooks her. I wonder why that is after, she told Spartan, "I'm not going to take your money."
I know, right?
I wish that would have just made Spartan go and pick another girl and then go upstairs with a different girl.
Right? And then Bridget's like, huh? Like she's just
Bridget just goes and be superb to watch through the wall. She would.
She would. She'd just be peeping like a creeper.
Yep. And so now, since Spartan is not minding her, some dudes are coming in and walking upstairs with Bridget. And also, Spartan is insanely strong and stronger than all of the men, of course.
Yes, of course.
Because, quote, "I watched from the balcony as the scout I'd tumbled just an hour before went over with his fellow to tap her on the shoulder and shake her hand. She was gracious, or so it appeared from above, leaving her hat on and shaking hands hard like a man. Without fail, each man took his hand away and looked at it in apparent surprise at her grip, which rankled me. Most of them had started out as farm boys, after all. More than likely, any of them and their mamas had held them to her teat with hands strong enough to drive a 20-mule team. Yet there they were, each and every one looking at his palm like he'd just shook hands with Daniel Boone."
Oh, for God's sake. I thought this part was so stupid. Like, what? So how would you even have any idea how a mother held their baby whenever your mother died when giving birth to you, and you have no interest at all in motherhood or being a parent or being married? So I don't really know.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird comparison to make when she doesn't really know anything about any of these guys. I mean, I guess some of them she might know because they tell her about their life upstairs, but
yeah, but they're still like, we don't know if these are like reoccurring customers because they're not named.
No. And she doesn't say how many of them are locals and how many of them are drifters, but we know this is a drifter town because suddenly, as soon as Jim stops protecting the brothel, it's all drifters.
Yeah, because she like denied him the marriage proposal and it upset him,
Yep. Bridget is doing her kind of just looking over the bar, waiting for her next trick. She sees Spartan playing cards with the dudes, obviously beating all of the dudes, taking all of their money. When one of the madams approaches Spartan and asks her to basically be a celebrity guest at the brothel for a couple of days, and that she would be paid $40 a night and she'll just help sell the liquor and hang out. Kind of a weird proposal, but she eventually agrees.
$40 a night.
Yeah.
Wow, that's 80 in 2 days. Like, okay, that's a lot of money. How much is this warehouse making?
Yeah, for real. How much alcohol do they expect Spartan to sell?
And how much money are they going to be able to have, like, to replenish the alcohol too? So, like, where are they getting their expenses from? Like, oh my gosh, it's just a lot of questions.
And also part of this deal is that she wants to be able to sleep with Bridget. So she's like, "Look, I will be here, pay me $40 a night and let me go and sleep with the redhead." Mm-hmm. And so then Madame agrees, but she's just like, "Be discreet." And then they go upstairs.
And then that's when Bridget like loses herself in the throes of passion.
And they're laying next to each other and they're shit-talking men.
Yeah, they are. Oh my gosh, it's shit-talking men. Like, Spartan, it's funny because Spartan basically has like the attitude of a man. Like, Spartan does everything like a man, is basically a man, but doesn't have a penis. So it's like, there's no like nuance thrown into this character whatsoever. So the article's saying there's two main characters when Spartan is like even less of a character than Jim is.
Yep. Now we got Spartan and Bridget are kind of just laying there together. I don't know how much time passed because technically Spartan paid enough to have Bridget all night. But then, like, once they're done,
Yeah, like
her
what?
door is knocked on and they're like, hey, Jim is downstairs. You need to come downstairs.
That's
So
what got me too.
apparently,
It's like, how come Jim hadn't like turned up at all in that time? Like, you'd think that they'd be worried that that would happen. Like,
yeah.
I feel like it's weird that they're getting mad at Bridget for like risking certain things by not like appeasing Jim as much as she should be, but then allow Spartan to have sex with her whenever that could completely and totally ruin their reputation, period,
It
with
would.
anybody. Like,
Especially because they know that Bridget is Jim's favorite.
yes.
And so they should be like, no, you can't. Like, $40, we'll pay you $40 and as much alcohol, and you can sleep with one of the other girls, but you can't really sleep with Bridget.
Yeah, you can't sleep with Bridget because Bridget is like Jim's favorite, and Jim is who's keeping all the weirdos out of the bar. Supposedly.
Yeah.
Why would you risk that? That's like a huge liability and like completely contradicts anything that they said to her about how she needs to appease Jim.
Yeah. So then it doesn't really matter. She goes down, so she rushes to get dressed. Spartan goes to do her thing. Then she goes downstairs and grabs Jim, and he comes upstairs and he's all kind of pouty and sad, and Bridget is mocking him for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because he says that he's upset that she turned him down, and she's like, and he's, oh. She says, are you now? He glanced at me sideways, looking for all the world like a shaggy bear. Yeah, looking for all the world like a shaggy bear with a bramble caught in his ass fur. I suppose that he had a right to be a little put out, for I hadn't so much as tried to see him while he was injured. But in the moment he struck me, not for the first time, as childish, to think a grown man thus bent out of shape over a whore less than half his age.
Oh my gosh, that really made me mad too. I'm just like, this man actually genuinely cares for you and wants to give you a better life. And you're like spitting in his face at his feelings when you've been pretending to be his like girl this entire time, even if it's fake. Like, I understand that, like, well, the madams put you up to this, but at the same time, I'm like, it would have been interesting if she did start to develop feelings for Jim, or at least feel some fondness for him because he is a nice person and he treats her well and he doesn't hurt her or abuse his standing in the community at all.
Yeah, well, technically, she even has described him as being tender with her because he obviously is already imagining them as spouses.
Yeah, he's being tender with her and stuff like that. And then as soon as Spartan shows up, she's fixated with that. Like, and it's really weird because Bridget is really given no like thought into her attraction to women, or if she's even attracted to women at all. Like, we don't really know what Bridget's attracted to except for food. Like, that's all I got to say about that. But I felt bad for Jim. I really did.
Okay, let me correct the record here. She goes downstairs after being told, hey, Jim is here, and he is at the bar, and he's looking sad at the bar.
Yes.
And then she mocks him, and then they go upstairs, and he proposes to her again, and she's like, no. She's like, I'm not wife material. So then Jim leaves upset, saying that Bridget has been lucky so far, but everyone's luck runs out at some point, and when that happens to her, she can come and find him. And he sincerely means that. Like, she does that later. And he's not like mocking her to just rub it in later.
No, he's not. Not at all.
So Arabelle warns Bridget that their madame saw Jim leaving upset and that she should be careful. This upsets Bridget and she immediately just switches to, the fuck do you mean by that? Instead of saying thanks for the warning.
I know, exactly. It's like she's just trying to warn her. I'm just like, you need to be careful because like Jim is somebody who is actually keeping the peace here and you have disrupted that. But that's what bothers me about Kate allowing Spartan to go upstairs with Bridget and be with Bridget that way and kind of technically be with her almost all night. I'm like, where was Jim then? Were y'all worried about Jim then? No. Because y'all had a new novelty to protect your bar. Doesn't really matter who it is as long as they can keep your freaking brothel safe. It doesn't matter.
Yep. After Jim leaves, Bridget goes and sits down with Spartan and is like, how did you know that I would go into the alleyway with you the other night? And Spartan is just like, oh, I looked at you and I just knew.
It's a lesbian X-ray vision there.
Skip to the two of them laying in the dark in Bridget's bed, talking about shooting people. And Bridget says that she's never shot anyone. And who would she even shoot in this line of work, despite having seen freaking Sally shoot somebody to defend her?
I know. I was like, really? And that didn't arouse you? But suddenly, like, this does? Like, I feel like she's more aroused by people killing each other and beating each other up.
She's being told by Spartan that she should get a gun for her own protection. And she's going, well, who would I even shoot as a whore?
You don't know what kind of John's going to come into that bar. I mean, look what happened to Sally.
Literally, Sally already had this conversation with you and said they all have guns. If they decided to end you, it would take 2 seconds and you could not fight a man off.
No, you could not. No, not one.
That's what then. And Sally already explained that to her. And now she's like, I don't know. Who would I even use a gun for?
I feel like this is like a very bad attempt to make Bridget seem like the submissive one here compared
But
to.
it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah. It's too late. I'm not saying it's not too late. I just thought it was interesting what you brought up.
So the next day, she is told to go and see Lila because of the sheriff. But Bridget is like, I don't feel like it. And I'm going to go and meet Spartan. So screw this. There are no ramifications for her for defying her madam, by the way.
No, not at all.
And Spartan teaches her how to shoot.
Yeah, that was pretty much all that happens. Nothing of significance happens.
So then Bridget gets back to the whorehouse, and then Lila is like, upstairs right now. We need to have this conversation. Again, no punishment. They're just having the conversation now that they would have had that morning.
Yeah.
They're like, why is Jim upset? And so then Bridget says, he proposed to me. I told him no. And they're like, excuse me? Why didn't you tell us this? Because Jim is an important client. He keeps us safe. And if you had told us sooner, we could have helped you figure out a way out of that situation that wouldn't have upset the client.
Exactly. And she's like, well, he's just a trick. He's another trick. And they're like, no, ma'am. No, ma'am. And she fucked up big time here. She did.
And she doesn't even get kicked out for it.
No, she doesn't. You would think
she doesn't get any punishment for it. They're like, well, we're all going to suffer and it's your fault, but just get back to work. They're not even like, we're going to take your money. You get to go and clean the toilets. They don't do anything.
They don't do anything to her. They just scold her. And then it's like nothing. It's crickets again.
Yep. And so then move on forward a couple of days, and the scalpers have now apparently overrun the brothel.
Yeah,
they must have somebody at the entrance of the city of the township being like, BT Dubs, head on over to the Queen if you want to abuse the horse, because nobody's watching them.
Yep.
Because otherwise, how else does this make any sense? The sheriff is still in charge of the town.
Exactly. And the brothel is still a place of business, and it brings in traffic. And if somebody does that, it could possibly endanger the town.
Yep. These dangerous people being in town are going to endanger the town.
Yeah, like, you think they're going to stop at the whorehouse?
Yep.
No. They'll go to the Emerald next, and then they'll go to the bank.
Yep. So the scalper is trying to go upstairs with Bridget, and she's really uncomfortable because he's kind of crazy looking. Spartan steps in and saves her from going upstairs, but a fight breaks out, and Virgil, random guy, I think he's another guard at the
he's like another
vicinity.
Inconsequential character.
He gets a head wound.
But who cares?
Do we even know what happens to him later?
But no, Spartan throws his scalper out on his petard, just drags him. Like, how big is this guy and how strong are you? Because it's hard to drag I just could not. I was like, really, girl, you are not a girl, you are a man. Oh my God.
So Vigil took enough head damage that he is out of commission and needs to see a doctor. So now Lila's like, hey, Spartan, you took out one of our guards, or a guard got into a fight that you were involved in. We're going to need you to take his place until he can get back into work. Will you do it? And then she's like, no. And then she looks at Lila and then Bridget, and then she's like, okay, fine, whatever. But I also have to go to another township in order to be on a jury for this case of this dude that I brought in, or to be involved in this trial.
I
don't really believe that, but okay.
I didn't believe that either. Like, that's random. Why didn't you?
No, that's probably her. That's probably her meeting with her brothers and Sally. Let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
Lila can't go out to see the doctor. I don't know why you would send freaking Bridget to the doctor when you said, I think it was Arabelle who has the relationship with the doctor in town who usually services the doctor. I don't know why you wouldn't send her to the doctor to go and ask him, hey, can you come and see this? But you send freaking Bridget, because the doctor sees Bridget and is like, yeah, no, I have other people that are more important to service. So I'm not coming to the brothel to deal with your problems. Maybe later.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, oh yeah, Virgil took head damage, but it's not enough to actually hurt him long term. And later he's eventually fine.
Yeah, man, he's fine.
The narrative even goes, oh, it turns out the damage wasn't that bad. And he recovered in a couple of days.
So there was no real ramification for that either. It was just like something that happened. And then we were on with it. We're on the live. We're on the show. Let's go.
So Spartan is gone for 3 days. Bridget's staying away from any of the new clients because they all look scary. And now Lila is finding out that Spartan is out of town despite having agreed to be there. And Lila is reasonably pissed since Spartan said that she would do that job and just kind of left. But Bridget then yells at Lila that she doesn't work for you. Kind of, she sort of does when she agreed to do that job.
So
because of this, and you would think that more people would have been pissed off at this, a fight breaks out at the bar. Pierre gets shot, but everything's going to be okay. Then there is more angsting with Bridget. Constance is like, we're going to run away to Louisiana, but we're just friends. We're not a couple. We're not romantically entwined, you know.
Yeah.
And so then Bridget is angsting because she's going to lose Constance. And Spartan comes back, and then she's telling Spartan about all of her feelings after they have sex and that she feels betrayed because Constance is going to leave. And now she's like, what if I went with you or something? Theoretically, she's fallen in love with Spartan. And so she's like, yeah, let's go. And so then Spartan is like, you know what? Okay, fine, you can come. And so then we got a speed run of these preparations where now she's getting her money and she's buying boys' clothes and she's buying some food and she's buying a crappy gun because apparently all she can afford is a crappy gun despite having spent none of her money.
Yeah, like I don't understand that. Like how much were the clothes? How much was the food? But she literally packs up everything that she can to go with Spartan, like everything. Like she knew what to get, like right off the bat.
And then when she gets the gun, she's at the gun shop and they're like, what does a little lady like you need a gun for? And she's like, a lady should be able to defend herself. And then like the gun shop owner like sneers at her.
I know.
And it's judgmental and it's what?
Like exactly. I'm just like, wait a minute. This is
everybody had a gun at that time.
Everyone had a gun at that time. Women had guns at that time. Like if they weren't like Colts or revolvers, it was like, you know, Winchester rifles and shit like that. Yeah, like
women having guns was
women
not
having guns. What a concept.
Oh my gosh, almost as conceptual as women wearing pants.
Oh my god, the horror. What am I gonna do?
So now everyone is just hanging out. Some of them aren't there. They've gone to the bathhouse. And then Sally is suddenly back with these two men and being snotty.
And everything's suspicious because the narrative requires it to be suspicious. Like nobody knows why Sally could return. Like, oh my gosh, but she's friends with Lila. I just don't see any reason for her not to return. Maybe plans changed because back then, like, you know, sometimes your plans would change on you. Maybe she decided she didn't want to go to California. But they're all acting suspicious of her, and it's weird. And these two men that she has with her later, which it's ridiculous. Like, this whole chapter was ridiculous to me because I'm like, why is this? I don't understand the atmosphere because I felt like Sally was actually fairly well liked by everybody except for Bridget.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, like she comes in with these two guys, and one of them is described like I think was like he just wasn't very. He was just more discreet, but the other one that she was with was like handsome, and they get greeted by Lila. Lila invites up Sally and then her person, but for some reason, as Constance and Bridget are talking, Bridget says that the people that Sally is with are Spartan's brothers. And we're like, how do you know that? Because there was no point in the book at all where Spartan tells Bridget the names of her brothers, doesn't show them a picture of her brothers, like at all. And it's just, how do you know that?
And shortly after that, a gunfight ensues where Kate ends up dead. Pierre dies because Sally has come to rob the place with those two other guys and with Spartan because Spartan is also part of this little robbery crew. So they take the money and run after murdering some people. And then Bridget is just sitting in resentment stew, quote. I sat by the hearth and stewed through the proceedings, finally having time to indulge in selfish anger. Like a bookkeeper, I worked my way through everyone who'd led us to this point, totting up the wrongs done with like deficits in a ledger. Sally swanning into the place as though she still belonged here, as though any of us owed her anything, and after all anyone had done was try to help her.
But the thing is, like, Sally,
What?
Sally didn't even come in thinking that, like, that makes no sense to me. It's like she didn't act like they owed her anything. It just seemed like she was there to say hi until she betrayed them. Like, that
She
was
was just going back to California. It just felt like she was stopping in on her way to California.
yeah, stopping in, or maybe even not going to California anymore. She goes, I'm just going to take to traveling now. And so we came down this way and I thought we'd see you. That was
Yep.
basically it. And it's like, Sally didn't act like she thought that they owed her anything. But this is where we kind of figure out how that, this is the reason why Spartan knew to, like, go to Bridget, because Sally had been talking to Spartan about Bridget's unclean or unnatural thoughts.
Also, show me when Sally actually asked them for anything, because like she's the one that protected Bridget when Bridget butted in on her John and then got attacked.
Yeah, exactly.
So like we didn't see Sally ask for anything. Sally was
true.
performing the whole time she was there.
Yeah, Sally didn't ask for anything. Sally didn't even ask for anything. We didn't see Sally have any kind of conversation with Lila or Kate. We didn't hear anything because Bridget apparently blacked out because she had a head injury from that guy. And so the next thing we know, Sally's leaving. Jim has cleaned up the mess that Bridget caused. And then Sally has to leave because Bridget is Jim's favorite. And now it's like, oh, well, we didn't owe Sally anything. I'm like, you kind of did.
Yeah, you kind of ruined her job and took away some of her money and got her in trouble with the law.
Yeah, and then sent her further north to Cheyenne and the Wyoming territory, where it's further away from the destination that she wanted to go in. So you kind of do owe Sally something. I just found that to be ridiculous.
And so then continuing with the quote, Kate, with her reckless dependence on first-time whore, as if she could think no better way to protect her business than some young gal making nice to a low-rent lawman. Lila, for closing her eyes to the dope creeping up through Kate's mind, allowing her to get feeble just when we needed her the most. Jim, watching over us only when it suited his purpose and never letting us forget. It was all ruined. And for what? For money, for a bit of cash that wouldn't see their pathetic little gang through till springtime, certainly not the way Spartan gambled and Sally drank. At the thought of Spartan Lee, my jaw clenched up again. I could have pulled down the whole saloon board by board, one rip for each kiss, one crack for each look, one axe blow for every time, for every hand she'd ever laid upon me. I'd have liked to tear the whole place down into a heap and set fire to the wreckage, one great roaring blaze, for all of the love that she'd made to me, for letting me fall in love with her, for picking up my heart and putting it in her pocket with all of the careless ease of a matchbook, not just for what she'd taken, but for what she'd let me believe, for all of the work that she'd put into lying to me. Instead, I poured liquor through my clenched teeth and snarled my way through the songs while rage scrabbled in my chest like a pack of wolves, all caught in one trap, biting each other's legs and howling in each other's faces.
Oh my gosh, angst.
So dramatic.
You barely knew Spartan. You barely knew her. Like, we barely saw any kind of conversation between you two. There was not enough to justify the feeling she developed for her. Like, we don't ever get any perspective from Spartan either. And so I just, there's nothing here. And to sit here and be mad at Jim, I'm just like,
yeah, Jim didn't do anything.
Jim didn't do anything. Like, in fact, I don't even know how Jim managed to keep that freaking brothel safe. Do you think it happened? I just don't know. Like, before Bridget, how did he keep it safe? Like, who was there compensating him then? So it's just ridiculous to me. It's super inconsistent.
So Bridget comes back and everyone is moping. She's angsting and she's like, I cannot believe that Spartan did this. I'm going to go and see Jim. So then she goes to Jim and he's like, well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I can't help. Like, they're not here anymore. And
yeah, they're probably long out of his jurisdiction. And she's like, but what about all the times we had? Didn't that mean nothing to you? Well, they clearly didn't mean anything to you.
Yep. And so she tries to do that. And he's like,
Sorry.
I'm not risking everyone's lives because a whorehouse was robbed. Sorry. And so then she gets up and leaves and she's angry. She's like, I wish he had just slapped me instead of saying he wouldn't help.
I
Which
know.
is, again, it's an echo of her being like, I wish my dad didn't ask me for emotion and would just beat me instead.
I know, right? It's just ridiculous. I'm like,
Ah.
Bridget is a stupid character.
So she comes back, and everybody at the bar is like moping, obviously, because Pierre is dead and Kate is dead. And, you think that Bridget might have a little more
Compassion
sympathy,
for everybody.
compassion,
Also
especially for
grieving.
Constance, because Constance just lost her not boyfriend.
Yeah, and then not even that, but Constance and Pierre were actually planning to skip out and go to New Orleans together.
Yup. So Bridget wants revenge for everything that happened, and she hears she hears Grace and Lila through the walls planning to go after Spartan and Co. to get their revenge, and she wants in. She eventually convinces them to let her go because she's like, "Look, I know where they're going, and
Yeah,
if you
she's
don't
so happy
take
to get
me, then I'm gonna go anyway by myself, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna tell you where I'm going. So screw you." So they're like, "Fine."
They let her go.
And she got this change of clothes montage where she puts on the man clothes that she was going to run away with Spartan in. She gets her hair cut because that's what every girl does after a really bad breakup.
Uh-huh.
And then they ride off. So this is where we return to the cabin from the beginning of the book that she sat in with her dad, because that is apparently a cabin that is owned or at least used by the Lees, and they're kind of all just in there. So they catch up, and a gunfight ensues, and they all
They kill
die
the
except
brother
for Spartan.
and Sally. They kill Sally and the brothers, but Spartan, of course, conveniently gets away.
And so then she's chasing after Spartan,
Finds
and Constance and her sneak up on.
Constance and I think it's because Lila got shot.
Yeah, Lila
And
stays
then-
on the horses.
Yeah.
So Lila got shot. She's going to stay on the horses and then get back later. And then Constance has like a shotgun. And so Constance and Bridget sneak up on Spartan. There we go. I lost her
Yeah.
name.
It's
And
okay.
where did
It's an awkward
Constance even
name.
go?
I don't know where Constance
Because
went.
there's a moment there, obviously, when they're being intimate and she's going in for a kiss and then she gets stabbed. So where the frick did Constance go?
Yeah, where was Constance?
And then Spartan gets away, obviously, because Bridget was stabbed. And then because Constance is still there. Constance is the one that got her back on the horse.
Yeah, she is. And not only that, but the shotgun that Constance has, guess who that came from? Jim. Jim showed up to give them some help, even if he couldn't go himself. He
Yep,
gave them
he's
a
like, here's
shotgun.
some guns.
And
So then Constance somehow is able to help Bridget, but is not able to stop Spartan from getting away, even though she's like right there.
I know, exactly. And it's like,
And then
Spartan gets away. Bridget gets stabbed by Spartan because Spartan's like, at least can I have a kiss before I die? And of course, Bridget stupidly falls for that and goes in for the kiss, and then she gets stabbed. And he goes, "Sorry, Red, you shouldn't be so trusting or whatever." I'm just like, wow, I really wanted you to die. I feel very let down. I wanted you to die because I cannot stand betrayal like that.
And then in the epilogue, Constance gets Lila and Bridget back to the whorehouse. Constance moves into Pierre's room and she learns how to play poker, and it's really good for business. Eventually, Bridget feels the need and desire to go and travel the world, so she does. And Constance sees her off, and it's like, oh, she sees her off looking like a mom seeing off her young boy as he goes to school or something.
Yeah, something stupid.
And it's just like, why is this the ending? Like, you've got so much that you've built up with Spartan, with this revenge that she gets away, and your thing is just, I'm gonna go and just like travel the world.
Yeah, I mean, well, if it's like a series that's going to be happening, or if there's a second book coming out, then maybe we'll see Spartan again or something. I mean, I'm not going to be reading.
But at the very least, her motivation should have been, I'm going to find Spartan.
Yeah,
Not like I'm just gonna travel the world.
yeah,
I
you
want
got betrayed.
adventure.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you got betrayed super badly by somebody that tricked you into thinking that you loved her.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to go willy-nilly, pell mell, do whatever now and be an outlaw or a bounty hunter or something like that. I don't know. But that's basically what happens to her, and whatever. It was so stupid.
Aside from like everything, one of the other things that really stood out to me in reading this book is that at no point of anything did Bridget ever actually want anything. She had no purpose. She had no desire, not even a survival drive. And that makes a huge difference in the creation of a novel. Because
Yeah.
if your character is driven, then they're going to be doing something in any given scene to try to get that thing. So whether it was, I need to survive the prairie and get somewhere better, I need to have a job so that I can feed myself. And then you have that imperative of what is more important, feeding yourself or making sure that you're not disrespected by Miss Smacky. And so
Exactly.
then, like, every single scene should have had something. It is the purpose that drives it forward. And that's something that also could have interacted or influenced the way that she interacted with her Johns or with the other girls, saying, well, what do you want? Why are you here? And then she sees that all of them are kind of there thinking that they don't have a further future. And that's not the thing that she wants. And then that
Yeah.
could have been something that influenced her wanting to travel the world.
I would say so too, because like again, like I said, throughout this entire time, she's just sort of coasting along, and like her wants are so superficial.
Mm-hmm.
Like her wanting to go with Spartan is superficial because it's like, oh, you can't like exist without another person, essentially. But again, like she had no desire to do anything. She had no desire to go anywhere. She had no desire to be with anybody until Spartan came along. And even then, that relationship was so poorly crafted and in the background that it didn't matter and it didn't justify her like sudden emotional feelings toward this person. Spartan does not get introduced until like 50% of the way. This is 50% of the way through this book, and to someone say that she's like a main character is ridiculous because nobody in here feels like a main character except for Bridget. Everyone else is just secondary, and
Yep.
they're so secondary to the point. Like again, they're interchangeable. Like
Yep.
Arabella, and I don't even remember the other girls' names because there was a couple other girls. It just seemed like new girls were coming in every now and again, but she didn't make any real strong connection to anybody because Lila started mistreating her after Sally left, and it never seemed to get patched up either. She had no real drive to do anything. It says, "Oh, I had some fight left in me" or whatever, but it's just again coasting, freeloading.
And if, yeah, fight for what? Because another
Yeah.
on top of that, which also affects the purpose and the drive, is if your character is good at like everything that they do, then they don't have the drive to be better. If she goes into the brothel and she's immediately, a number one pick for somebody and she's getting money all the time and she's really good at having sex, even though she never had it before,
Yeah.
then she has no drive to do better or to survive, and she's not going to face adversity. And this is a problem that a lot of writers end up in because they don't want to let their character look bad. So
Yeah.
then they make them good at everything when they just shouldn't be. And it's those failures that push them to either find a different way to succeed, like different ways to make money, or
Yeah.
get better at what you're doing. And it's a struggle.
Yeah. I agreed with that completely. I don't know where this has come from because, like, I hear all the time, like, flaws, give your character flaws, don't make them
Only
hurt.
attractive flaws. People say give
Oh,
your characters flaws, but the only flaws that I typically see, or the majority of the flaws that I see, are the ones that are considered attractive. So they don't actually take away from the character.
absolutely.
It's
It's
like, oh, this
true.
character is clumsy. Okay, but are they clumsy at any time where it is actually an inconvenience or makes them look bad? No, you've made it an attractive flaw.
It's like all these people nowadays are just making perfect characters, and I'm just like, come on. Like, I remember just enjoying reading about flawed people and whatnot. I just think that this is tragic, and I don't know what's going on right now. And I think that people are just, again, like you said, afraid to let their characters look bad.
Oh yeah, personal pet peeve of mine, which it doesn't help that since this book has no direction and it doesn't
Yeah.
seem to have any none of the characters have their own values in any sort of way. But personally, it's usually a peeve of mine to have romanticization of like killing, which is what Bridget does. And you
Yeah.
don't look badass when you're like, oh, I imagine myself breaking that guy's nose and just blood arcs all
Yeah.
over the place and what it's like to murder people. It's not badass to not value people. You just look like a psychopath. And if that's the direction that you want to go with your character, that they are psychopathic, then fine. But it's not the devaluation of life that makes somebody badass. You can't have a character who's good at killing and they still either see it as a necessary evil of some kind, or there's some value to it, or it's a sacrifice that they were willing to make for one reason or another.
Yeah.
But your character does not become badass just because they're okay with and even
Killing people.
even enthusiastic about killing people.
Or wanting to hurt people.
Yeah.
For no reason other than the mere thrill of it. And it'd be one thing if someone slapped her across the face and it made her so mad she wanted to hit him in the face. That's one thing, but that doesn't happen. But she does fantasize about it, about like getting into these like fights and stuff like that. And even then, we're saying this, she doesn't often fantasize. There's maybe like 3 or 4 occurrences where she did kind of fantasize about it, particularly with Jim, whenever he had gotten into a fight with somebody and they were doing it together, and all she could imagine was just beating people up while they're doing it, which is really a weird thing to think about. The throes of the stuff. But yeah, Bridget's character again was super inconsistent, and so whatever that article said, it completely lied about everything that it was talking about. There was nothing about this. I think somebody said that Bridget had like a heart of gold, and she doesn't.
Oh yeah, the author said that in an interview. I'm going to say it was either the author or the interviewer.
Could have been somebody like that. Either way, like the character of Bridget is not a person that has a heart of gold. She's like mildly selfish and mildly this. She's just kind of meh. Like she can't irritate. At least for me, I would get irritated and I would get mad sometimes. But it wasn't nearly to the extent of like Guns and Smoke, where I was like fuming over what was happening in that storyline. But with Bridget, it's just like meh. With Constance, it's meh. With all these other characters, it's meh, meh, meh. It's just meh. There's nothing remarkable about this book at all.
So what you're saying is it is not reimagining Westerns?
No, it's not. If you want to constitute as just throwing gay people in there as revitalizing it, then no, you're not. I'm sorry. Like,
does this even count as a lesbian romance though? Because
I don't think so. Like,
Spartan comes in halfway through. It's not much of a part of the plot. Like not Constance. Bridget doesn't spend like any time really thinking about it.
No,
she just gets thirsty after meeting. What's her face? After meeting Spartan and a little bit with Sally at first.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's nothing here.
No, there's no bearing on the story whatsoever or her own personal conflict. So I feel like a lot of like people going into this book are going to be disappointed by kind of the lack there is of this relationship between Spartan and Bridget. It's very like, again, superficial and shallow, because the only time they really spend time together is when they're doing it. And the very few times that one time Spartan took her shooting. That is not enough to justify wanting to run off with Spartan.
Speaking of the freaking shooting, if Spartan went in there in the first place to go and con somebody to find out where the money is or whatever to get through the security, why the frick would she teach one of the girls how to shoot and get her a gun? That just makes your job a bigger liability. So a lot of the actions in this book don't actually make any sense for what they're trying to do. And you might be like, oh, it was a mislead. Okay, but she didn't have to invite Bridget to go and shoot a gun, because Bridget wasn't even thinking of buying a gun until Spartan was like, you should though.
Yeah, exactly. So
and then Spartan just stabs her. So it wasn't even because Spartan was going to double cross the people that she was already double crossing with. It just, there was no reason for Spartan to teach her how to shoot a gun or to encourage her to get a gun.
Like, not 1 second. Like we're saying, I do so love to mix business with pleasure and stuff like that. But I'm just like, do you have feelings for Bridget? We don't know. We never find out if she did have feelings for Bridget or not, because she stabs Bridget. Like, she tricks Bridget every step of the way and gets away with it. And it's like, it's ridiculous, because like the author is like, I don't know, why don't you want to kill off your female character? She's not a good person. If you're
I think that's for a future story, because that, like, this felt, the way that it ended felt like creating a revenge story for her to chase after, for her to have a rival later. So if she ever does any further stories with Bridget and Spartan Lee, but that's why it ended up feeling like a prologue to me. But
yeah,
like, this is the origin of Lucky Red. But again, we didn't get any idea as to why she would even be called Lucky Red, because she wasn't lucky at all.
Yeah, she wasn't really lucky at all. And not only that, like, no one else calls her Red except for Spartan. So there's nobody in the brothel who refers to her as Red.
Which, at the very least, even the ending when she gets stabbed, if you want to establish the name Lucky Red without doing anything extra, it would have been Spartan stabs her and then goes, You're lucky that I like you, Red. And they give her a kiss and then run off. And then she just adapts the name Lucky Red because of that moment.
Yeah, exactly. She didn't have to stab her either. I'm just like, what is going on? Where the hell was Constance? Constance was with Bridget. And like, she had the shotgun. She could have blown a hole in Spartan. Shame, shame. But that's Lucky Red.
Yeah, it's not revitalizing or waking up the Westerns.
No, I wouldn't say that. That was completely like, again, I said it had the language of a Western, but it didn't really do anything that was Western like, because the adventure really starts to happen pretty much as soon as the book is almost over. Like, it happens in chapter 21 where they leave the brothel, and then 22 is whenever, they catch up with them, and then after 22 it's the epilogue. So like, all of this brothel nonsense, and then the quote unquote adventure. So it was ridiculous. It just had not enough to justify it being a Western. It was not, I mean, sure, it's not like any other Western I've ever read, but again, it's not revitalizing the genre. It's not waking it up. It's not doing anything. It didn't do anything for it. You think that adding in a female character and making her like queer is somehow revitalizing the genre? It's not. It's just like what you were telling me earlier, like a marketing ploy, and I'm tired of seeing that as well. For like mediocre books that do nothing, and then not only that, but the queer romance in this book is so bad. Like, and that was not the worst book I've ever read. It certainly isn't, but it's a book that I am probably going to forget within a week.
Let us know what you think. Have you read Lucky Red? Will you read Lucky Red? Good luck if you do. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.